Hey guys, tonight we're kicking things off in a world of gas lamps, tight corsets and unsettlingly cheerful chimney sweeps. The year is 1837. You're alive. Barely. And Queen Victoria has just taken the throne at the tender age of 18. Congratulations. You now live in an era that will redefine industry, empire etiquette and emotional repression. But just so we're clear, you probably won't survive this. Most don't. The working conditions, brutal. The hygiene, questionable. The social hierarchy, unforgiving. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not Queen Victoria. I'm not ruling your life. And tell me, what city are you watching from? And what time is it over there? I'm curious which corner of the empire you're resting your eyes in tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a girl. She's barely a woman, raised under the suffocating gaze of her mother and a very specific, very clingy German advisor named Sir John Conroy. They've been managing her like she's made of porcelain. And politics. You're standing among a small crowd outside Kensington Palace, where rumours are crackling through the fog like fire through dry grass. King William IV is dead. Long live the Queen. Inside, Victoria's being informed she's now ruler of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. No pressure. You squint at her carriage as it rolls out later that day. Tight-lipped, serious, and somehow already iconic in her black dress and tidy bonnet. You don't know this yet, but she will rule for 63 years. A whole era is about to bloom under her name. You live in the transitional space between Georgian poof and steampunk grit. The architecture still clings to neoclassical order, but the streets are getting louder, smellier, more crowded. There's horse manure everywhere and more factories than churches. You're either a tailor, a governess, or a 12-year-old already working full-time. Victoria's rise is seen as a fresh start. Her youth excites the nation. The last monarchs felt ancient and stiff. Victoria? She's short, stubborn, and oddly likeable. Her first move is a flex. She removes her mother and Sir Conroy from power. You feel a little thrill at the gossip. She's got guts. And then there's Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister. Victoria clings to him politically and emotionally. He's 40 years her senior, but it's complicated. You hear whispers about how she writes to him daily. Gushy letters. At least she has someone. The court still reeks of male dominance and powdered wigs. Meanwhile, you try to make rent. Not that you call it that. It's just what it costs to not die of exposure in a soot-smudged tenement. The Industrial Revolution is still in full swing, and cities are swelling like overstuffed corsets. Factories rise beside damp rivers. You spend your days hunched over machines that will absolutely maim you if you blink wrong. And yet, for all the danger, you feel something brewing. Energy, change, steam-powered optimism. Newspapers multiply. So do political pamphlets, self-help books, and serialized novels. If you can read, and you're lucky enough to not be working 16 hours a day, you might even afford the occasional cheap print of poetry or scandal. One of the first national obsessions is Victoria's love life. You hear that she's proposed, yes, she proposed, to her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Gross, sure, but not unusual for royalty. He arrives in 1840 and is immediately awkward, brooding and into railways. You watch them wed in a ceremony that sets bridal fashion for the next century. The white dress, that's Victoria's idea. You sigh. Now every bride you know wants to copy it. Their love is real, though. She calls him her angel. You watch them walk the palace gardens, doting and giggly, until the royal children start arriving. And arriving. 9 of them. You're not sure when she found the time, considering she's also building the empire and micromanaging the Prime Minister. But Victoria changes after marriage. You notice it. She becomes colder in public, more conservative in her policies. Albert influences her heavily, pushing for education reform and high moral standards. You hear the word respectability tossed around a lot now. A whole cultural mood starts to shift. There's a growing obsession with modesty, with appearances, with an ideal of womanhood that's basically a decorative lamp that sometimes breeds. You're expected to dress properly, speak softly, and never ever speak of what actually goes on in the bedroom, even if you have 9 kids like Victoria. Meanwhile, the monarchy digs in. Victoria and Albert understand the value of image. They commission family portraits where they sit surrounded by toys, dogs, and cherub-like children, looking like the ultimate middle-class couple, except for the fact that they own several castles and technically rule over a quarter of the planet. But hey, relatable content sells. Even you, broken bone-weary, find yourself moved by the image of the Queen nursing her baby while wearing a lacy gown. It's soft power, and it's working. Not everyone's thrilled, though. You overhear arguments in the streets about Chartism, a growing political movement demanding voting rights for the working class. Victoria isn't a fan. She calls it wicked and foolish. You raise an eyebrow and keep your voice down. Treason's not a great look in this decade. The first big scare of her reign happens in 1840, a failed assassination attempt. You weren't there, but everyone's talking about it. Edward Oxford tries to shoot her in her carriage. Twice. Misses both times. She survives, unscathed and unnervingly calm. Public opinion surges in her favour. You hear street songs about her bravery before the week's out. The Victorian mythos begins here. The brave young queen, the devoted wife, the mother of the empire. It's only been a few years, but already the era has its tone. Progress wrapped in lace, power cloaked in decency. You sense the storm clouds way off on the horizon. Colonial expansion, class revolt, the rise of steam. But for now, people are optimistic. Even you. Even with the soot in your lungs and the rent overdue, you wonder if maybe this new queen will steer the country somewhere better. Just don't breathe too deeply. You wake to the sound of hammering. Not birds, not bells. Hammering. It's 1841, and your city is becoming a machine. Every street you walk sounds like it's being built in real time because, well, it is. Welcome to the industrial boomtown years. Steel, steam, and soot. Your new holy trinity. Factories are erupting like volcanic metal beasts, pumping smoke and workers into the sky. You live in a world where the air tastes like coal and the water might be soup. But hey, there's work. There's always work, as long as you don't mind losing a finger or coughing up black every morning. You pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday, and trudge through the foggy sludge of the city. The cobblestones are slippery with ash and horse droppings, and you sidestep a puddle that smells vaguely like cabbage and despair. The factory whistle screams from a few blocks away, a shriek that could wake the dead, or more accurately keep the already dead-eyed moving. Your job? Textile mill. Not glamorous, not even tolerable, but it's what's available. You spend hours hunched over rows of machines that sound like they're coughing up ghosts. Cotton fluff floats through the air, getting into your lungs, your eyes, your breakfast. The older workers have a name for it, mill fever, but it's just chronic bronchitis with a catchy tune. One kid, barely 10, loses part of his hand to the looms this week. They send him home with a coin and a pat on the head. And here's the quirky part. Despite all this progress, cities are somehow getting worse before they get better. You'd think more money and more tech would equal more comfort, but you'd be wrong. Entire neighbourhoods are being built overnight, poorly. Brick by brick they stack houses without proper ventilation, sewers, or even clean drinking water. You share a single outhouse with 20 people, and the Thames is basically a moving trash can. You catch wind of a wild new term, urban planning, but it's mostly just theoretical right now. London alone has nearly 2.5 million people packed into it like sweaty sardines in a foggy tin can, and you're one of them. You can't afford to leave the city, and even if you could, where would you go? The countryside is bleeding jobs, eaten up by the very machines that now rule your daily life. Still, not everything is grime and grind. There's an unmistakable buzz in the air, an undercurrent of invention that almost makes the suffering feel noble. Almost. Railways are expanding, and every time a new line opens, you hear people say things like, "This will change everything." They're not wrong. The railways are time machines in disguise, cutting cross-country journeys from days to hours. You're not sure you'll ever afford a train ticket, but the mere idea of it is intoxicating. Meanwhile, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert are doubling down on their vision of progress. Albert, your royal nerd-in-chief, is obsessed with technology and industry. He walks through exhibitions with the wide eyes of a child and the eyebrows of someone trying to fix an entire empire with blueprints. You hear that he's planning something huge, a global fair of innovation. They say he wants to build a palace made of glass. Sure, buddy. On the street, things are less elegant. You pass a line of coal carts rattling through the road, horses straining as boys with soot-slicked faces heave beside them. One pauses to cough, a wet, ragged sound, and spits into the gutter. You keep walking, everyone does. There's no room for pity when you're too tired to feel your feet. Your evenings are spent in communal housing, huddled with family or strangers, or both. You eat thin porridge and maybe a slice of bread if someone had a decent shift. Candles are expensive, so you sit in the dim light, listening to someone read aloud from a penny paper about a new factory in Manchester, or a sighting of the Queen. The walls sweat moisture, and the air smells like bodies and boiling cabbage. Oddly, people are obsessed with cleanliness right now, even as the cities reek. There's this growing belief that moral filth leads to physical disease, and so pamphlets arrive weekly, preaching the gospel of soap, prayer, and open windows. You don't have any of those things, but you read the tracts anyway. Some days you genuinely wonder if your runny nose is divine punishment. One night, in a rare burst of leisure, you attend a lecture in a public hall about the modern miracle of gaslighting. The speaker's eyes gleam with devotion as he describes how entire streets can be illuminated. You picture it, a city that glows. You can't imagine it, not really, but you want to believe. The gas lamps are spreading across the wealthier districts. Where you live. Still candles if you're lucky. Of course, with progress comes a whole new breed of horror. Accidents in the factories are so common they barely register. Death by machinery, by gas leak, by structural collapse. It's all just part of the economic boom. You hear about a mine collapse up north that kills dozens, and the papers praise the heroic industry of the region. No names, though, just numbers. There's a growing movement to improve working conditions, unions whispering in pubs, pamphlets tucked under coats. But organising is dangerous. Too much talk and suddenly you're unemployable, blacklisted from every mill in town. You keep your head down, your family needs the income. The scholarly debate right now? Whether industrialisation is a blessing or a curse. The economists say it's the dawn of prosperity. The doctors say it's the birth of modern disease. The clergy say it's judgment for humanity's hubris. You say it's Tuesday, and you have to be up at 5. Still, there's a kind of twisted beauty to it all. The skyline bristles with chimneys. Smoke rolls like clouds. At night, you stand on a rooftop, illegally, and watch the orange glow of furnaces on the horizon. It's not stars, but it's something. This is the cost of progress. You feel it in your joints, in your lungs, in the raw scrape of your hands. But it hums beneath your feet. This power, this momentum. You're being swept forward whether you like it or not. And somewhere, a man is sketching a glass palace. You hear it before you see it. A low rumble, a vibration in your ribs. Then a shrill whistle cuts through the morning fog and the beast reveals itself, an iron serpent chugging into the station, belching smoke and steam. It's 1844 and the railway is officially eating England. You stand on the platform watching it hiss and hiss like it's alive. The train isn't just transport anymore, it's a national obsession. The industrial boom gave you factories. This next phase gives you velocity. Suddenly the world isn't as big as it used to be. What took days now takes hours. You, a lowly mill worker, could theoretically be in Liverpool by dinner if you had 2 shillings to rub together. You probably don't, but still, the idea excites you. It's all a little terrifying, honestly. These machines weigh tons and can hit terrifying speeds of 30 miles per hour. Scientists warned that your organs might liquefy. They didn't, but people still faint on the regular. A clergyman in Surrey insists the trains are opening the door to Satan's domain. You wouldn't be surprised. That screech alone sounds like the devil filing his nails. Still, the railways are connecting lives like never before. Markets, towns, ideas. Rural kids are suddenly seeing cities. City folks can catch a whiff of fresh air before coming back to the grime. You overhear a gentleman on the train declare that railways will civilise the masses. You cough so he knows you heard him. It's not just England. The trains are creeping across Europe, crawling over hills and into valleys. Prussia, France, even the US, which is barrelling toward its own problems at frightening speed. But England's system is vast, chaotic, and deeply Victorian in its contradictions. Luxury cars for the rich, open cattle cars for the rest of you. First class gets velvet and cigars. You get windburn and splinters. And speaking of contradictions, have you noticed how travel is changing your sense of time? You don't think about it much, but trains force synchronization. Before railways, every town ran its own little clock. Noon in Exeter could be 12:14 in London, but that's chaos when trains run on timetables. So, welcome to railway time, soon to become Greenwich Mean Time. Now, even time is industrialised. You resent it a little. But hey, at least you're late in a standardised way. Railways bring you fresh food, fast mail and strangers. Lots of strangers. You've never seen so many different accents on one platform. The trains churn out variety like a novelty sausage machine. City elites eye the third-class passengers with suspicion, while rural villagers whisper about city morals corrupting their daughters. Everyone thinks someone else is ruining England. But business is booming. Investors are throwing money at train companies like gamblers at a roulette table. You hear about the railway mania, that's what they're calling it, and how even fishmongers are buying shares. It's a frenzy. For a brief moment, people think trains will solve every problem from poverty to gout. They don't, but the optimism is kind of nice while it lasts. That optimism crashes hard in 1847, when the market tanks and a lot of those hopeful investors lose everything. Some companies go bust. Some trains never get built. You overhear someone in the pub say, "The only thing that runs faster than the trains is the debt." You nod, mostly to look clever. Still, the system survives. The trains keep running, more reliable than most politicians. Speaking of which, Robert Peel's government is keeping a close eye on it all. There's concern about the lower classes having too much mobility. Travel used to be a privilege. Now even you, grimy as you are, can ride to another city and look around. Imagine that. It's not all neat timetables and black smoke, though. Accidents happen. A bridge collapses in 1847. A boiler explodes in Leeds. You see the aftermath of a derailment once. Wood splintered like toothpicks, twisted metal, and shoes without feet in them. The worst part, people still board the next train. They've got to. Life doesn't pause because someone got flattened. Still, you ride, eventually. Your first trip is short, Manchester to Preston. You climb into a third-class car and sit on a wooden bench, shoulder to shoulder with other sweaty, curious, slightly terrified souls. The whistle blows, the engine huffs, and you lurch forward. It's loud. You can't hear your own thoughts. Smoke pours in through the cracks, stinging your eyes. The landscape whips by in a blur of green and grey. You press your forehead to the glass and feel for the first time like a part of something moving. It's easy to romanticize trains from a distance. Poets and novelists do it all the time, but inside they're rattling beasts. No suspension, no heat, just motion and metal. Still, it beats walking. The Queen herself takes a ride in 1842. Prince Albert loves the rails, and he convinces Victoria to brave the journey. She's nervous at first. Imagine dying on your own invention, but ends up loving it. After that, the royal seal of approval is stamped on every locomotive. You see ads declaring travel like Her Majesty, as if you, poor and coatless, could ever afford the first-class carriage with velvet curtains and hot tea. And yet, something has shifted. The world is tighter now. Messages move faster. Markets react instantly. Ideas travel by rail. Newspapers arrive before the ink is dry. People move for work, for love, for curiosity. You hear of young women leaving their villages to become governesses in cities they can't spell. Men heading to mining towns for wages they may never live to spend. And here's the weird part. It all feels normal now. 10 years ago, a man riding in a metal box through the countryside would have sounded like pure madness. Now it's Tuesday, but not everyone's thrilled. Farmers complain that the trains scare the cows. Hunters say they've ruined the peace. Preachers claim they're speeding up sin. And yeah, they probably are. Fast travel means fast temptation. You can now sneak off to an entirely different city for a night of fun, and be back home by dawn with your virtue only slightly dented. The scholarly debate now, whether the railways are spreading enlightenment or eroding tradition. Are they uniting the kingdom, or just flattening it into one big noisy blur? You think about it on your ride home, the countryside smeared across the window, and decide it doesn't really matter. You're moving too fast to look back. The fog doesn't roll in, it oozes, heavy, yellow-grey and thick as gravy. It clings to your clothes, your eyelashes, the inside of your throat. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chime, muffled like they're ringing underwater. Welcome to Victorian London at its most atmospheric. Part horror novel, part fashion show, and always a little damp. You've arrived at the collision point of slums and silk hats. You step onto a cobbled street where, in the space of 3 blocks, you can pass a barefoot child gnawing a potato, a gentleman in a top hat discussing stocks, and a butcher's boy chasing a goose with a stick. Social contrast isn't just visible, it's absurd. There's more wealth in some of these parlours than in your entire borough, and yet a single misstep could land anyone in the gutter. The rules are brutal. The pavement is uneven. Let's talk numbers. By the 1850s, London is the largest city in the world, with well over 2.5 million souls crammed into its sooty embrace. It's a city of contradictions, gleaming clubs and crumbling tenements, poetry readings and public hangings, afternoon teas and raw sewage. You've got a foot in both worlds, which means your boots are usually filthy. You spend the morning working a shift at a print shop in Clerkenwell, the afternoon delivering parcels to Mayfair. That alone is a journey through multiple universes. You start the day surrounded by coughing labourers and rat-gnawed staircases. By lunchtime, you're ringing the doorbell of a townhouse where the maid answers with eyes that never make contact. Inside, it smells like polished wood, lemon oil and superiority. Everything is upholstered. The wallpaper costs more than your annual wage. You spot a gentleman drinking sherry and reading a newspaper he probably owns. He doesn't see you. You're part of the furniture, background noise like the grandfather clock or the coal fire. But step back outside and you're in another world. The East End, Bermondsey, and parts of Southwark are packed tighter than a corset at a debutante ball. Entire families sleep in one-room flats with a single cracked window and questionable plumbing. You know one woman who rents her bed in shifts, day for sleeping, night for, well, not sleeping. You try not to think too hard about it. A typical alley smells of boiled cabbage, coal smoke, and humanity. Kids swarm the streets, barefoot, loud, always sticky. You sidestep a pile of something you hope is rotting fruit and duck into a bakery for stale bread. You've learned to ignore the occasional rat unless it tries to bite you, but there's life here too. Raw, chaotic, unfiltered life. The slums aren't just misery, they're loud with gossip, music, and fights that end in tears or laughter, sometimes both. People get by, they hustle, they barter, they curse in ways you never imagined. And somehow, despite everything, they laugh. You catch a glimpse of something in a shop window, a daguerreotype of a man in a cravat and impossibly high collar. Photography's new, exciting, and expensive. Only the upper crust can afford to immortalise their stern faces in silver plates. You hear that Queen Victoria herself sat for one. She looks like she's smelling something off camera. Speaking of royalty, you hear whispers that Prince Albert is working on some enormous exhibition, a showcase of Britain's industrial might. It's supposed to go in Hyde Park, and the rumours say it'll be housed in a giant greenhouse made of glass and iron. People laugh at the idea until they stop laughing. You make a mental note to check it out if they ever finish the thing. Back on the streets, you pass a row of shops selling everything from hair pomade to taxidermied birds. Middle-class ladies emerge from hatters and haberdashers, swaddled in layers of fabric, each dress wider than the last. Crinolines are in fashion now, those giant hoop skirts that make women look like elegant belles and render sitting a logistical nightmare. You try not to laugh, but one nearly knocks over a lamppost trying to board a carriage. Even fashion is aggressive now. Gentlemen strut by in waistcoats, swinging canes they don't need. Everything is surface. If you're rich, you look it. If you're not, you blend into the smog. The difference between you and a banker isn't just income. It's language, posture, and the ability to pretend your shoes aren't falling apart. And here's something fringe but fun. You learn about street photographers who capture candid photos of passers-by without permission. Most people have no idea they've been photographed until they see their own blurry faces on a paper weeks later. A few even pay extra to have their image burned onto a card, proof they existed, even if no one important noticed. By night, the city transforms again. Gas lamps flicker on, casting halos of weak yellow light through the fog. Shadows stretch. The rich retreat to parlours and theatres. The poor spill into gin shops and supper stalls. You head towards Seven Dials, where the corners converge like a drunken compass. It's loud, rough, and full of stories. You sit at a pub where a woman sings an Irish ballad, off-key but heartfelt. Two dock workers arm wrestle nearby. A man offers to read your palm for a ha'penny, and you let him. He tells you something vague and ominous about a great turning. You shrug. Every day in the city feels like a coin toss between fortune and disaster. Scholars debate what makes Victorian London tick. Some say it's the middle class, their rising power, their obsession with status. Others argue it's the poor, their labour, their numbers, their constant pressure on the system. You're not a scholar, but you think it's something murkier. The tension. The way everyone pretends the layers of society aren't crushing each other, even though you can feel it every time a silk-gloved hand drops a penny for a beggar without looking. It's a delicate game. You could rise, maybe. Save enough, learn enough, marry someone slightly above your station. Or you could get sick next week and vanish into the statistics. Either way, you take the long route home, past shop windows and fog-slicked alleys, wondering what it's all for. You pass a lady in a carriage who briefly meets your eyes. For a moment, just one moment, you exist in the same story. Then the wheel splashes you with gutter water, and she's gone. Let's be honest, you're being watched. Not by ghosts, not by the police. Well, maybe, but by morality. That invisible, suffocating presence lurking around every gas lamp and lace curtain in this uptight empire. It's the 1850s now, and you've stepped into a world with a permanent frown. Welcome to the age of the moral panic button, a time when your hemline, handshake, and even your cough could be deemed deeply concerning. You wake up and dress with caution. Too much ankle? Scandalous. Not enough starch in your collar? Lazy. Did you glance at someone too long? Immoral. You tuck in your shirt, your emotions, and your possibly blasphemous curiosity about what actually goes on at the opera after dark. At the centre of this cultural straitjacket is Queen Victoria herself. She's everywhere now, on coins, in portraits, in your neighbour's sitting room, scowling from a tiny print above the fireplace like a judgmental aunt. Her image becomes a symbol of purity, restraint, and rigid gender roles. She's basically the nation's headmistress, and you, my friend, are very much in detention. The weirdest part? This obsession with morality doesn't just come from the top, it's viral. The middle class is obsessed with appearing proper, which means repressing every natural impulse until you could pop a button just from thinking impure thoughts. And the result? Etiquette manuals. So many etiquette manuals. You own one, or at least borrowed it. Inside are rules for literally everything. How to greet someone, like bow, no eye contact. How to sit, spine like a steel rod, legs tightly aligned. How to faint, gracefully with decorum. And how to die, ideally not in a brothel. There are entire pages about glove protocol, and yes, this means your days are filled with people pretending to be better than they are. Drinking is now only acceptable behind closed doors, with the curtains drawn and a prayer book nearby. Swearing, forbidden. Although you'd be surprised how creative people get with substitutes. Fiddlesticks can hit hard when shouted with enough venom. Religion booms alongside this purity craze. Evangelical Christianity in particular becomes the spiritual engine of Victorian morality. You're dragged to sermons that last 3 hours and leave with a lingering fear that sneezing on a Sunday might land you in hell. The churches are full and so are the confessionals, but the real battleground, sexuality. Oh boy. You can't say the word leg in polite company. Table legs are often dressed in little sleeves. Yes, furniture legs, because someone decided that even implied shapeliness could lead to lust. There are debates in Parliament about whether showing a piano's foot pedal might unravel society. You'd laugh if it weren't so exhausting. There's also a rising fear about female hysteria, a condition affecting, well, women who have thoughts or emotions. Doctors recommend everything from smelling salts to extended bed rest. In extreme cases, you hear about institutionalization. Your friend Sarah disappeared into an asylum last year for being melancholic. You suspect she was just bored. But beneath this polished surface of manners and morals is a trembling undercurrent of hypocrisy. The same men who preach purity often slink down to brothels after dinner. You pass one on your walk home, discreetly tucked behind a fake dressmaker's shop. The door opens just long enough to catch the flicker of red lamps and perfume. It's not exactly a secret. Everyone knows. But no one says anything out loud. That's the Victorian way. Pretend. Pretend everything's clean. Pretend vice doesn't exist. Pretend your chimney sweep isn't 9 years old and coughing blood. But here's the fringe fact that keeps you up at night. There's a thriving underground market for instructional pamphlets, anonymous, obscene, and wildly popular. They pass hand to hand, tucked inside hymn books or hidden beneath sofa cushions. Some are medical, others are not. Either way, they prove that behind every tight-laced corset is a brain humming with curiosity, and possibly some very detailed illustrations. This tension between repression and indulgence fuels a kind of national theatre. Every act of daily life is a performance. Walking, talking, dining. These are no longer habits, they're rituals. You perform gender, class, faith, all in ways that make you long for a good scream into a pillow, which you do, but only at night when your landlady's asleep. But here's the kicker. Not everyone fits into this new moral mould. There's an entire underclass of rebels and oddballs who refuse to play along. Artists, bohemians, socialists. You meet a painter who wears velvet at breakfast and lives with 2 women. You think he might be a genius or just incredibly broke. Maybe both. And there are others questioning it all more quietly. Women like Florence Nightingale, who's pushing her way into the male-dominated world of medicine. You hear she's headed to some war in the Crimea. Most folks scoff, but you think she might be onto something. Still, the broader public isn't ready for radical change. Not yet. For every whisper of reform, there are 10 more pages of etiquette tips. For every act of rebellion, there's a sermon about decorum. You feel trapped between 2 worlds, the one everyone pretends to live in and the one they actually do. The scholars are divided. Some argue that Victorian morality was a stabilising force, a much-needed anchor in a time of dizzying industrial change. Others say it was a tool of control, keeping women, the poor, and anyone other locked into invisible cages. You think it's both. A velvet prison, lined with Bible quotes and cologne. Your evenings blur into teas, tight shoes, and polite conversation. You nod at the right times, offer safe opinions, and laugh softly at jokes you don't really get. You know how to say nothing with flair now, how to seem agreeable while your brain screams. But every now and then you catch a glimpse of something real. A stolen kiss behind a carriage. A scandalous book tucked into a governess's coat. A couple holding hands too long in the park, and you think, maybe people aren't as repressed as they seem. Maybe they're just scared. Scared of being judged. Scared of being outed. Scared of ending up in a workhouse because someone spotted you buying the wrong soap. So you keep your head down. You follow the rules. You wash behind your ears and say "Mom" when required. But inside you're building something. A quiet defiance. A suspicion that all this virtue might be more about control than goodness. And one day, when the time is right, you'll stop pretending. You're 6 years old, stuck in a chimney. Your hands are raw, your knees bruised, and there's soot in places that will never be clean again. Welcome to Victorian childhood, the phase of life that's supposed to be all innocence and lullabies. Unless, of course, you were born on the wrong side of a waistcoat, and you were. So here you are, clinging to bricks in a narrow, pitch-black shaft, coughing and wondering how your entire body managed to get stuck between 2 walls. This is not an exaggeration. In the 1850s, Britain child labour is a feature, not a bug. Kids work in mines, factories, matchstick shops, and, lucky you, chimneys. The job description? Climb up narrow flues and scrape out soot with your fingers. Perks include permanent lung damage, stunted growth, and the occasional death by falling or suffocation. Your boss is a man known only as Tom, who smells like gin and doesn't believe in birthdays. You wriggle free after several breathless minutes and tumble out into the parlour of a townhouse in Chelsea. The lady of the house screams, not because you're injured, but because you've left a soot smudge on her floral rug. You get slapped for it, then sent out the back door. Payment? A crust of bread and a good lad if she's feeling generous. The paradox is stunning. Children are worshipped in poetry and painting, but in reality they're little labourers. Romantic notions of youth float around in upper-class circles, portraits of cherubic, lace-clad children staring wistfully into nothing. But for the working class, childhood is something you crawl through with your teeth clenched. Still, there's growing awareness. Reformers are starting to poke the bear. A few brave MPs have visited factories and come back shook. They talk about kids hunched over looms for 12 hours, about toddlers hauling coal in underground tunnels so narrow adults can't fit. You hear whispers of new laws, like the Factory Acts, that might limit child labour hours to a mere 10 a day. Revolutionary. Meanwhile, middle and upper-class children are living a completely different life. If you're born with the right name stitched into your pinafore, your daily routine includes French lessons, embroidery, and being scolded by a governess who has mastered the art of passive-aggressive sighing. You eat custard, not coal dust. You read books instead of clocking into a boot-blacking factory. And oh, the toys, tin soldiers, rocking horses, dolls with glass eyes and terrifying human hair. You once saw a toy shop window in Kensington. Pure fantasy behind the glass. You pressed your face to it until the shopkeeper told you to move along. The doll stared back, smug little aristocrats in crinoline and silk. Education is a battlefield. For the wealthy, it's tutors and private schools where Latin is considered light reading. For the poor, it's Sunday school, if you're lucky. Some factories allow kids to leave early one day a week to go learn how to spell God. The rest of the alphabet. Good luck. But you hear about a new push for compulsory education. Some people are scared. Educated poor kids might start asking questions, or writing letters, or demanding books that aren't the Bible. There's one charity school near your street run by a woman named Miss Havers. She smells like peppermint and despair. She teaches letters with chalk on a cracked board and lets you read one story a week if you promise not to spit indoors. It's the first time you see your own name written down. It looks like a secret code. Even in the world of upper-class youth, childhood isn't always safe. You overhear a nursemaid at the park mention a child dying of diphtheria, another from scarlet fever. You don't know what those are, but they sound expensive. Disease is the great equalizer, one of the few things that doesn't care how many servants you have. You say a little prayer for the sniffling boy who shares your floorboard at night. Queen Victoria herself is obsessed with children. Her own, that is. She pumps them out like clockwork and poses for portraits in various states of motherhood. The newspapers coo over her maternal instincts, never mentioning that she once called breastfeeding disgusting and often handed the babies off to nurses as soon as possible. But who's counting? Here's your quirky fact of the night. There were instructional books teaching children how to die properly. Literally. Little Eva, in Uncle Tom's Cabin, was meant to be a role model for a good angelic death. Victorian children were encouraged to imagine their deaths as pure, noble acts of submission to God. The cultural message was clear. Suffer sweetly, and you'll earn a harp in heaven. You'd settle for boots that fit. You get a break once a month when the travelling puppet theatre comes through. The Punch and Judy show sets up near the market, and for an hour you forget your lungs hurt. It's pure chaos. Mr. Punch beats people with a stick while children shriek with laughter. No moral lesson, just anarchy. You love it. Behind all the societal tension is a massive scholarly debate. What is childhood really? A sacred, protected time, or just cheap labour with smaller hands? Philosophers like John Locke started asking questions back in the previous century, but now reformers are making noise. Some want to ban all child labour under a certain age. Others argue that hard work builds character, as if dying of lung rot at 9 builds anything except a coffin. And then there are the street kids, the mudlarks, who comb the Thames for scraps to sell. The crossing sweepers, who clear paths through horse manure for pennies. They sleep under bridges, steal apples, and somehow survive. They're tough, funny, dangerous, and very much real. You envy them and pity them at the same time. One night you find a ragged little book on a bench, The Child's Companion. It's full of fables about obedience, temperance, and loving Jesus more than jam. You keep it anyway. The paper is soft and the pictures are kind. You fall asleep that night dreaming of a world where children don't work in chimneys, don't cough up blood, don't die of things with names too long to pronounce. A world where they go to school, eat warm soup, and play games that don't involve dodging the constable. A world that, believe it or not, might one day exist. But not for you. Not yet. You're on a boat now, crossing waters that glimmer like melted pewter. The sun is brutal overhead, the air thick and foreign. You've left the fog of London behind, and you're headed somewhere warm. Too warm. And no, this isn't a holiday cruise. This is Empire duty, baby. And you've just been posted to a tropical colony you can't pronounce and definitely don't belong in. You're part of the vast machine that is the British Empire, now stretching its limbs across continents like it owns the place, which according to every government map it technically does. It's the 1860s. Victoria's been queen for over 2 decades, and under her, Britain now controls about 1/4 of the Earth's landmass. That means you, and several million other Brits, are being sent out into the wide world to help civilise it. Right, you arrive in India, or maybe Jamaica, or possibly Singapore. They didn't give you a choice. The landscape hits you first. Blinding colour, oppressive heat, smells you can't name. The sounds are overwhelming. Different birds, different languages, even the insects sound aggressive. You're here to work, not explore. Maybe you're a junior officer, a clerk, a missionary, or one of the many soldiers rotated in to maintain order. You try to keep your spine straight and your hat on properly, but honestly, you're melting in your boots. The uniform isn't made for this climate or for comfort. Everything is unfamiliar. The food is spicy, the clothes are lighter, and the locals are unimpressed. You've been told they need British guidance, British law, British etiquette, but you can't help but notice that they seem to be doing just fine without your help. In fact, they seem pretty annoyed you're here. You hear the words civilising mission a lot. That's the party line back home. Britain isn't conquering. Oh no, it's educating. Building railways, teaching Shakespeare, teaching them how to queue properly. You're the face of progress, armed with a pocket Bible and a rigid sense of superiority. But here's the awkward bit. The empire is messy, hypocritical, often brutal, and you're standing in the middle of it, soaked in sweat and pretending you're doing something noble. It's hard to feel noble when you're guarding a shipment of tea and opium. Let's pause for some historical context. The British East India Company, basically a corporation with its own army, has already been running the show in India for years, looting resources and demanding taxes. In 1857, just a few years before your arrival, things got ugly. A massive rebellion, referred to by Brits as the Sepoy Mutiny, and by Indians as the First War of Independence, shook the empire to its knees. You weren't there, but the stories linger. Soldiers shot in their beds, villages burned, atrocities committed on both sides. After that, the British Crown took over direct control of India. Queen Victoria became Empress of India in 1876, because being a queen apparently wasn't enough. You feel this tension everywhere, the fear, the paranoia, the unease that maybe, just maybe, the locals don't see you as a benevolent visitor, but as an occupier. Still, the show must go on. British clubs are erected in every major city, exclusive sanctuaries where expats sip gin and tonics and pretend they're in Bath. You've never felt more unwelcome and more entitled at the same time. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Britain exported cricket to its colonies as a civilising tool. Nothing says empire like convincing someone to spend 5 days playing a sport with no conclusion. The idea was that cricket would teach discipline, fairness, and British values. Ironically, in the coming decades, colonised nations will get very good at it, often better than the British themselves. You're sent to oversee a railway project one day, part of the empire's legacy of infrastructure improvement. The locals build it. You supervise from the shade. The railway isn't really for them. It's to move goods and soldiers faster. You know it. They know it. But you still smile like you're doing them a favour. Back home, people don't see this part. The newspapers print stories of noble savages being lifted into the light by pale hands. The real stories, the ones involving forced labour, famine mismanagement, cultural erasure, They don't make it into the penny dailies. There's an open scholarly debate back in the drawing rooms and universities of London. Is the empire a moral good? Philosophers argue over whether British rule is bringing order or simply masking theft with table manners. You sit in the heat, listening to your boots squelch and wonder the same thing. You're starting to notice cracks in the whole imperial illusion. You meet a Bengali scholar who quotes Milton better than you, a Nigerian merchant who speaks 4 languages to your 1.5, a Chinese doctor who quietly saves lives while the British medical officer drinks himself into a stupor every afternoon. And then there's the paperwork, endless ledgers, export data, quarantine records. Half of the empire is managed by clerks like you, hunched over desks under slowly spinning fans. Bureaucracy is the real beating heart of colonialism. Tedious, relentless, impossible to escape. Some nights you write letters home, exaggerating the beauty, softening the realities. You mention the spices, the architecture, the sunsets, but not the flogging, not the famine you overheard rumours about. You draw little sketches of palm trees and tell your sister it's all quite exciting. You know that's a lie, because some days you wake up and feel hollow. You're not building anything real here. You're propping up a system that doesn't feel just. You're tired of pretending that this is what progress looks like. But what can you do? You're a cog in a machine that spans oceans. So you get up, you put your hat on, you follow the map, keep the ledger straight, salute your superior officer, and when you walk through a market and a local child stares at you with quiet fury, you look away. It's easier that way. The teacup rattles in your hand, not from nerves but from the steamer's vibration, as you cross another stretch of foreign water. You sip carefully. It's hot, fragrant. Earl Grey, with just the right amount of bitterness. The irony. You're drinking tea that's been steeped in war and addiction. Welcome to Britain's favourite beverage and its nastiest habit. Tea, opium, and awkward trade. Back home, tea is the national pastime. Rich or poor, everyone drinks it. Morning, noon, dusk, and sometimes even right before bed, because Victorian sleep hygiene isn't really a thing. But here's the kicker. Most people sipping it don't know or don't want to know where it really comes from, or what it costs. You're in the middle of the 19th century, and Britain's got a tea problem. A serious one. The leaves come mainly from China, where dynasties have been cultivating the stuff for centuries. The British Empire, totally hooked. But there's a catch. The Chinese want silver in exchange for tea, and Britain doesn't want to pay in silver. So what do? Easy. They get the Chinese hooked on opium. Let that sink in while you sip your next cup. Opium, grown in British-controlled India, is shipped by the ton into Chinese ports. You see it packed into crates, stamped with East India Company seals, loaded onto vessels with cheerful names like the Hope or the Prosperity. It's all very legal looking, which is impressive for something so wildly unethical. You weren't there for the first Opium War back in 1839, but you've heard all the stories. China, under the Qing dynasty, tried to crack down on the drug trade, burned a bunch of opium, blocked ports, basically said, "We're done with your nonsense," so Britain sent in the navy. Spoiler, Britain wins. Shocked. Neither is anyone else. You hear about the Treaty of Nanking, signed in 1842. China gets humiliated, coughs up Hong Kong, and is forced to open 5 treaty ports to foreign trade. It's not diplomacy. It's daylight robbery dressed up in lace and wax seals. You find yourself in one of those treaty ports now, maybe Canton, maybe Shanghai. British traders swagger down the docks with parasols and ledgers. Chinese officials bow stiffly. The local population, furious but mostly silent. The tension is sharp enough to slice through. Meanwhile, opium dens are thriving. You peek into one out of morbid curiosity. Low ceilings, bodies curled on mats, the sweet sickly smell of smoke curling into the rafters. It's slow, quiet destruction. And the British are profiting massively. Back in London, the public isn't really talking about the ethics of it all. Most people either don't know or don't want to know. They're too busy arguing over whether you should pour milk before or after the tea. Spoiler, this is a very serious debate and could end friendships. The real moral panic doesn't arrive until opium starts coming back into Britain. Suddenly, addiction isn't just a foreign issue. Laudanum, a liquid form of opium mixed with alcohol, is sold over the counter. You can buy it at any pharmacy, no questions asked. It's marketed as a cure for everything: headaches, sleeplessness, the vague female condition known as nerves. You try it once. You sleep for 13 hours and wake up with a poem forming in your head. Even Queen Victoria reportedly uses it. So do countless artists, authors, and ordinary citizens. It's the quiet, cosy vice of the age, hidden in desk drawers and medicine cabinets. Here's your fringe fact. Charles Dickens, Wilkie Collins, and even Lewis Carroll were all laudanum users. No wonder some of those books get a little trippy. But back to China. The resentment grows, another conflict brews, and in 1856, boom, the Second Opium War kicks off. You hear about it in fragments. British and French troops team up this time, march on Beijing, loot the Summer Palace, a marvel of architecture and art, and then burn it to the ground. For diplomatic purposes, of course. You hear one officer describe the looting like it's a treasure hunt. He pockets jade ornaments and writes home about it with glee. No mention of the flames, the fleeing civilians, the smoke curling over the palace gardens. Those details don't make it into the letters. You try to talk about it once at a dinner party back in London. The room goes quiet. Someone clears their throat. Best not dwell on unpleasant matters, they say, before asking you to pass the sugar. You do. And the conversation shifts to millinery trends. The empire runs on this kind of selective silence. The scholarly debate today is about whether these wars were inevitable. Some argue that global capitalism and empire were always bound to clash with traditional dynasties. Others say Britain's actions were avoidable and morally indefensible. You're inclined to agree with the latter, especially after what you saw at the docks. Still, trade thrives. Tea imports soar. The British public continues to dunk biscuits into hot brews without considering the cost. You watch crates arrive stamped with Chinese characters. Your friends ask what they say. You lie and say, prosperity. They smile. You say nothing else. Back in the colony, you see British officials discussing tariffs while locals look away, tired of pretending to respect them. There's a market nearby where you buy a small teapot, hand-painted and slightly cracked. The vendor doesn't speak, just holds out his hand for payment. You give him double. You don't know why. One night over a fire, you drink your tea slowly and wonder how many wars were fought for it. How many died for this single, quiet ritual? How many still are? You tell yourself you'll stop drinking it. You don't. But you do start asking questions. Quietly at first. Then more boldly. And even though the empire's gears keep grinding, you can't unlearn what you've seen. The taste lingers. You're walking alone through Whitechapel. It's after dark and the gas lamps are doing their best, but they're losing. The fog thickens around your ankles like wet wool, and every sound, footsteps, a cough, a distant clatter, feels too close. You tighten your scarf and quicken your pace. Because tonight, this part of London isn't just poor, it's hunted. You've stepped straight into the heart of murder, fog, and penny dreadfuls. It's 1888 now, and the city is gripped by a fear so visceral you can smell it. Blood and soot, overlaid with the faint scent of cheap perfume and damp brick. Women whisper warnings on corners. Police mutter about shadows. And in every cramped tenement, someone is reading the latest horror over a flickering candle. The Ripper has struck again. You already know the name. Everyone does. Jack the Ripper. He doesn't just haunt Whitechapel, he owns it. Whoever he is, or was, or maybe still is. The papers say he moves like smoke and kills like a surgeon. 5 women, so far. All of them poor. All of them considered disposable until their deaths made headlines. That's the uncomfortable part. No one cared about them alive. And those headlines? Printed in blood-red ink, full of speculation, contradictions, and just enough gore to keep sales high. You grab a penny dreadful off a street cart. A lurid pamphlet with woodcut illustrations of slashed throats and cryptic letters signed, "Yours truly, Jack." It's half news, half nightmare, and it's flying off the shelves faster than Dickens ever did. Everyone has a theory. He's a butcher, he's a doctor, he's a foreigner, he's royalty. Some people think he's the devil himself, walking the cobblestones with a scalpel and a grudge. The police are useless, overwhelmed, and slightly more afraid of public embarrassment than catching the killer. You see detectives pacing like they're in a stage play, muttering about leads that don't lead anywhere. But here's the secret that no one will say out loud. Part of London is enjoying this. Not the killing, necessarily, but the drama, the attention, the thrill of being near the fire without getting burned. Middle-class readers sip tea in Kensington and read about eviscerated bodies like it's bedtime fiction. Meanwhile, in the East End, you watch your back and keep your keys between your fingers. This murder spree isn't just a crime wave, it's a cultural earthquake, and it rips open 1,000 old wounds about class, gender, poverty, and who gets to live without fear. The victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are described in the papers with a cruelty that makes your stomach turn. They're referred to as prostitutes, drunks, common, but you knew one of them, briefly. You bought apples from her once. She called you love. Her name was Catherine. Her death makes the news, her life never did, and that's the Victorian paradox, isn't it? A culture obsessed with decorum but secretly feeding on violence. Every parlour has a Bible on the table and a drawer full of sensationalist literature. Every respectable gentleman devours the illustrated police news under the guise of moral concern. You wander into a bookstore on Fleet Street pretending to browse. There's a whole section now dedicated to true crime. Newspapers bound and sold as case files. Jack the Ripper is a brand, a shadow with market appeal. His victims are reduced to silhouettes, footnotes, cautionary tales. And here's the fringe detail of the night. One theory at the time claimed Jack was actually a woman, Jill the Ripper. A midwife, they guessed, who could have moved through the streets unnoticed, even carrying blood without suspicion. No one believed it, but it caught fire anyway. London loves a twist. Even Queen Victoria weighs in. You hear she sent letters to the police urging swift action. She wants lighting improved in East London. She wants women of character, hired to work with at-risk women. It's a rare moment where the Queen acknowledges what life is like beyond palace walls. The Ripper murders don't just create fear, they expose it. You see women organising, talking louder. There's suddenly more interest in women's safety, in rights, in the idea that perhaps the city should care about its vulnerable before someone starts carving them up. And yet the murders stop. Just like that. 5 canonical victims. Theories swirl, but Jack vanishes into legend. You never find out who he was. No one does, but his shadow never really leaves. Decades from now, people will still walk these foggy streets, wondering if the man next to them might be something else entirely. The scholarly debate now, whether Jack the Ripper mattered more as a criminal or as a symbol. Some argue he marked the birth of modern serial killers, media-savvy, methodical, theatrical. Others say he was just a brutal product of a brutal time. You think he was both, a mirror and a monster. Meanwhile, the penny dreadfuls evolve. They start to include vampires, haunted mansions, and vengeful spirits. You pick up one called Varney the Vampire and another with a pirate ghost named Captain Bloodspine. They're ridiculous and addictive. You read 3 in a row and don't sleep well. But it's not just fiction. You see the effect on the real world. Policemen start patrolling more, streetlights get added, women form watch groups, whispers rise about, reclaiming the night, though no one uses that phrase yet. Your friend Sarah, yes, the one from the chimney days, now works at a women's shelter near Spitalfields. She says they're getting more support than ever. Fear, it seems, can move funding faster than compassion ever did. And so life goes on. The fog doesn't lift, but you learn to walk faster through it. You avoid dark alleys, you keep your ear to the ground, and when you hear the clack of boot heels behind you, you don't look back. Because even when the Ripper is gone, the danger never really leaves. The air in the parlour is stale, equal parts rosewater, coal smoke and disappointment. You sit upright on a velvet chair that feels like it's judging your posture. Welcome to the world of parlours and paradoxes, where everything looks elegant but feels just a bit off. It's the 1890s, and you're in the home of a family that owns 5 teaspoons, 2 maids, and one suffocating sense of propriety. You're here for tea, and not the good kind. The kind where people smile with only their teeth and make polite conversation while mentally ranking everyone's morality and net worth. Every gesture here is coded. Every word is a tightrope walk over a pit of scandal. You glance around the room, heavy drapes, a piano that no one plays, paintings of dead relatives, all of them frowning. Even the houseplants look like they're repressing something. You sip your lukewarm tea and try not to slouch. Your host, a woman with a corset so tight she can only breathe in syllables, asks if you've read the latest instalment of the Cornhill magazine. You lie and say yes, everyone does. The conversation shifts to the bishop's sermon, then to the moral decline of public parks, and eventually to someone's cousin who dared to wear blue after Easter. This is Victorian domestic life at its most brittle. Everything must appear perfect. The family, the furniture, the female children. Any deviation from the script, an illegitimate baby, a bankruptcy, a nose ring, must be hidden or explained away with a vague illness and an extended visit to the countryside. Here's your quirky fact. Victorians actually had etiquette manuals for mourning, with charts detailing exactly how long you should grieve based on your relationship to the deceased. Husband, 2 years of black. Cousin, maybe 6 months. Neighbour's cat. Please be serious. These rules governed every part of life and death. Which is ironic, because most people weren't actually living. They were performing. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the parlour. Parlours are supposed to be cosy, social spaces, but in Victorian England they're status arenas, showcases of taste, restraint, and perfectly staged normalcy. You never enter one without checking your collar, your conscience, and your conversational topics. You've learned to avoid anything too stimulating, no politics, no religion, unless the vicar is present. And absolutely no references to the human body unless it's caught pneumonia or died of it. That leaves you with safe topics like decorative china, the Queen's latest appearance, and the weather in Scotland. So much repressed energy sits in these rooms, it's practically buzzing. Every time someone says how charming, what they mean is, this is hell, but I can't leave. You glance across the room at a young woman fanning herself. She's clearly smart, clearly bored, and clearly not allowed to speak unless spoken to. Her entire life is waiting. Waiting to be noticed, waiting to be proposed to, waiting to die of boredom in a lace gown. You catch her eye and raise your eyebrows. She almost smiles. Almost. Outside, the world is changing. Inside, time is frozen. The parlour is a pocket of false calm in a century hurtling forward. The trains keep running, factories hum, revolutions stir in corners of the empire. But here, the lace curtains flutter and someone's aunt discusses embroidery like it's a sacred rite. There's a growing unease beneath all this decorum. You feel it in the sudden silences. in the way your host grips her teacup just a little too tightly. People are anxious about money, about daughters, about scandal, about the creeping realization that no amount of prayer or punctuality can protect them from change. This is where the paradox kicks in. Victorian society wants to appear morally upright, emotionally restrained, intellectually pure. But underneath, it's riddled with anxiety, hypocrisy, and the occasional scandalous letter hidden in a drawer. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about this. Was Victorian repression a form of cultural self-defence, a way to control a society on the brink of collapse? Or was it a smokescreen, hiding an underworld of secrets that everyone secretly knew about? You suspect it's both. The parlour is both sanctuary and prison, shrine and charade. Let's take a moment to appreciate the daily emotional acrobatics. You're expected to express gratitude without enthusiasm, joy without noise, grief without tears, and passion only through embroidery or extremely passionate piano playing. If you must fall in love, please do it through a series of agonizing glances across a dinner table, followed by 3 years of silence and a proposal via letter. And still, things leak out. You hear gossip about a young lady who ran off with a French violinist. The family says she took ill and moved to Bath. A gentleman who wrote poetry a little too well suddenly leaves for South Africa. Business, they say. Everyone nods. One of your friends, Thomas, works in a bookshop. He tells you about a secret stash of banned literature hidden behind a false panel, novels that speak plainly about lust, longing and despair. He lends you one. You read it cover to cover in one night, then stash it beneath your mattress like it might explode. The real world, messy, glorious, is out there, but the parlour keeps its doors shut tight. Even within your own home, there are places you can't go emotionally. If you're a man, don't cry. If you're a woman, don't think too much. If you're poor, don't speak unless spoken to. And if you're queer, don't breathe. Still, you find ways to rebel. Small things. You slouch in your chair. You speak out of turn. You draw something unladylike in your sketchbook. You laugh a little too loud at a joke about bishops. It's not much, but in this world, even minor defiance feels electric. The music begins. Someone sits at the piano. You prepare for another rendition of The Bluebells of Scotland, played with exactly 3 emotions: duty, reluctance, and restraint. And yet, in the midst of all this performative calm, there's a kind of beauty, a fragile elegance, the way the lamplight flickers on polished wood, the delicate clink of porcelain, the slow, careful unfolding of a fan. It's artificial, sure, but it's also an art form, like kabuki or taxidermy. You finish your tea. The woman with the fan finally speaks. Her voice is dry and amused. "Don't you find," she says, "that everything in this room is pretending to be something else?" You blink. She smiles, and just like that the parlour cracks a little. The candle flickers once, then again. You glance at it just to be sure. There's no breeze, no open window, nothing to make it move, but the flame's dancing like someone walked past it. And just as you start to dismiss it as your imagination, the bell on the table rings softly, by itself. You're not in church, you're in a séance. Welcome to Science and Séance, where 19th century minds try to stretch across the veil and sometimes fall flat on their intellectual faces. Victorian England, for all its starched collars and scientific breakthroughs, is obsessed with the dead. You live in a society that runs on telegrams and train schedules by day, then gathers in dim parlours to whisper to spirits at night. Because while Darwin's over here rewriting The Origin of Species, Aunt Gertrude is in the drawing room trying to contact Cousin Edgar. You sit in a circle of believers and skeptics, hands lightly touching, breaths held. Across from you is a woman dressed in black lace, eyes closed, head tilted dramatically. The medium. She starts to hum, low and eerie. A cabinet in the corner rattles. Someone gasps. You're trying to stay calm, but honestly, you'd rather be at home with a scone. Victorian spiritualism isn't a niche hobby, it's mainstream. Seances, table tipping, spirit photography, automatic writing. Ghosts are everywhere, and not the moaning, chains-dragging kind. These spirits are chatty, helpful, emotional. If you're lucky, they'll send you loving messages from beyond. If you're unlucky, they'll knock over your teacup and tell you to stop dating that solicitor. But let's rewind a little. This ghost craze has a source. After the mass trauma of the Crimean War, 1853 to 56, and later the Indian Rebellion, death becomes an intimate part of public consciousness. People are grieving, and traditional religion isn't answering the mail fast enough. Spiritualism offers something cozier. Death, but with correspondence. And then there's science, charging forward like a steam train on fire. You hear about Darwin's On the Origin of Species published in 1859, and it shatters the comfortable narrative of divine creation. Suddenly, humanity isn't handcrafted by God, it's descended from monkeys. Victorians clutch their pearls so hard, they almost invent chiropractors. In this whiplash between faith and reason, people look for balance. So what do? They try to make spirituality scientific. They use scales to weigh dying bodies, to see if the soul has mass. They use Morse code to try and talk to ghosts. You attend a lecture where a man seriously presents data on how spirits might be vibrational anomalies. You nod along, mostly to blend in. And here's your quirky fact. Some Victorians believed ghosts could be photographed. Spirit photography became a real business. You've seen the ads. Portraits with wispy, translucent loved ones hovering behind the living. Totally convincing if you squint and suspend all disbelief. Some were done with double exposures. Others, straight up smoke and mirrors. But people wanted to believe. It makes sense. Queen Victoria herself dabbles in the occult. After Prince Albert dies in 1861, she goes full mourning mode. Black gowns, black stationery, black everything. And yes, she's rumoured to have attended seances, desperate for messages from her beloved Albert. If the Queen of England is lighting candles and whispering to the beyond, who are you to argue? You attend another seance a week later. This one's at a wealthy widow's townhouse. Gilt mirrors, Persian rug. The medium is a man this time, long fingers and theatrical flair. He channels a child spirit who speaks in rhyme. Everyone sobs politely. You notice he smells faintly of brandy. Not all spiritualists are sincere. Some are outright frauds, slipping notes under tables or using hidden wires to make bells ring. A few get caught spectacularly. But even then, their supporters often double down. Of course the spirits would protect themselves, someone says. They let her get caught to teach us humility. You try not to snort. Meanwhile, real science barrels on. The Victorians discover electricity, anesthesia, antiseptics, and X-rays. You hear about Ada Lovelace, a woman who wrote the first algorithm for a theoretical computer. You hear about Michael Faraday, tinkering with magnets and electricity like a sorcerer with a laboratory. You attend a public science lecture, yes, those are a thing, and watch a man in a bow tie demonstrate how sound travels using smoke and brass horns. It's mesmerizing. And yet, you notice something odd. He pauses before starting and says, "If the spirits permit." A joke. Maybe. But it lands differently when half the audience believes in literal ghosts. The tension between science and superstition isn't hostile, it's awkward. Like roommates who pretend not to hear each other's arguments through thin walls. Victorian society loves both. It worships logic and longs for magic. It believes in germs and ghosts. You can be a scientist by day and hold hands with spirits by night, and nobody bats an eye. Scholars still argue about this era's spiritualism. Was it a reaction to grief, A feminist rebellion? Many mediums were women, remember. Was it just a collective hallucination brought on by too much laudanum and not enough sunlight? You suspect it was all of that, and something else. A deep, aching desire to connect, to know, to find meaning in the fog of mortality. You attend one last séance. You're older now, wiser, maybe. The medium calls for silence. You close your eyes. Someone's breathing too loudly. Someone else is crying. The table creaks. You feel a chill brush your arm. And for a second, just a second, you think you hear a voice. Soft, familiar, impossible. You don't believe in ghosts. Not really. But that second stays with you forever. You hear the news from a street vendor, the kind who sells hot chestnuts and gossip. The Queen's gone black, he says, matter of fact, tossing a handful of roasted nuts into a paper cone. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Widow's weeds. She's not coming out of them. Not ever. It's 1861. Prince Albert is dead, and Queen Victoria is about to become more myth than monarch. Welcome to the age of Queen Vive, widow and brand, where grief becomes a fashion statement, a political tool, and the foundation of an empire-wide aesthetic. Albert's death hits her like a freight train. Typhoid fever, they say. He'd been unwell, but no one expected this. You weren't particularly fond of him. Too stiff, too German. But Victoria, she adored him. Obsessively. It was a love letter in slow motion, their entire marriage. And now the letter ends mid-sentence. The Queen retreats, literally. For months she refuses to appear in public. Curtains are drawn at the palace. Official functions are cancelled. Parliament mutters. The press speculates. Meanwhile, she wanders the halls of Windsor Castle like a ghost in crepe silk, clutching his dressing gown, ordering the servants to lay out his clothes every morning as if he might still come down for breakfast. And she dresses in black. Full mourning, head to toe. No colour, no jewellery, no softness, just layers and layers of grief. You think it's temporary. It's not. This becomes her. Victorians already took mourning seriously. This just puts it on steroids. Now there are rules, charts, fashion guides. Entire industries spring up to cater to the bereaved. You pass a shop window displaying widows' caps, jet brooches, black veils, gloves dyed so dark they look like spilled ink. Mourning becomes profitable. Here's your quirky fact. Victorians even had mourning stationery. Black borders on envelopes and writing paper, the thickness of which indicated how close the deceased was to the writer. You receive one once. The border is so thick it looks like a warning. You hold it with both hands, afraid of what it might say. Victoria's grief becomes a brand. Not in the cynical modern sense, but in that it defines her entire public image from here on out. When she does appear again, she's the widow of Windsor, sombre, severe, and endlessly mournful. Her subjects both pity her and worship her for it. You get the sense they see their own sorrows reflected in hers, and it comforts them oddly. But don't let the black fool you. Victoria doesn't stop ruling. If anything, she becomes more powerful in her isolation. The mystery grows. She's no longer just a queen. She's a symbol, a presence, a slightly terrifying maternal deity peeking out from behind layers of velvet and loss. Meanwhile, her children are growing up and scattering across Europe like well-dressed chess pieces. She marries them off to royals across the continent, securing alliances and spreading her DNA like a monarch-shaped fungus. By the time she's finished, she's the literal grandmother of Europe. You joke that any war in the 20th century will basically be a family squabble. Spoiler, you're not wrong. Back at home, Victoria becomes something else, the first modern celebrity monarch. Not just a ruler, but a brand, printed on tea tins, biscuit boxes, souvenir plates and commemorative spoons. Her face, once youthful and hopeful, now stern and shrouded, is everywhere. You see her portrait in schools, post offices, pubs. She's like the original influencer, except her aesthetic is funeral chic. And it works. Her mournful image fits the mood of the empire. Grand, heavy, self-important. Britain in the 1860s and 70s is striding across the world, snatching up colonies, imposing order, and quietly falling apart in some corners. Victoria, in eternal black, becomes the perfect figurehead for an empire that wants to seem wise, weary, and righteous. There's an open scholarly debate about this version of her. Was she politically savvy, using grief as soft power, or was she genuinely broken, a woman who simply couldn't move on? You're not sure, but you suspect it's both. Victoria was smart. She knew her image mattered, and she leaned into the myth because it worked. Of course, she wasn't entirely alone in her mourning. Enter John Brown, a Scottish servant and former gillie, which is a fancy word for royal hiking buddy, who becomes Victoria's closest companion in the years after Albert's death. People gossip, a lot. They call him the Queen's Highland servant, with a wink so obvious it leaves bruises. You see them walk in the palace grounds together. He's rough around the edges, too loud, too free with his opinions, too familiar. But she seems to relax around him. There are rumours she even had him slip into rooms without knocking. The horror, the scandal, the obvious affection. No one knows the full story. Some say they were lovers, others say she just needed someone who didn't treat her like porcelain. Either way, when he dies, she mourns him too. Quietly, deeply. A private grief layered under the public one. And then there's Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister who flatters her just the right way. He calls her Empress. He tells her she's brilliant. He brings her roses and lines of poetry. You can't help but notice. Victoria surrounds herself with men who make her feel seen. By the late 1870s, the mourning outfit is permanent. She appears occasionally, opening Parliament, reviewing troops, but the black never leaves. You once watch her pass by in a carriage. The crowd falls silent, reverent. It's like watching a living statue. You realise something important then. The Queen isn't in mourning. She is mourning. It's become her identity, her armour, her national service. And whether it's performance or pain, it holds the empire together in strange, sad, beautiful ways. You walk home that night thinking about grief, the way it carves you out and fills the space with echoes. Victoria filled hers with duty and black, and maybe just a touch of spite. And somehow it worked. You hear the music before you see it, a triumphant march, all brass and bravado, echoing through the tree-lined paths of Hyde Park. You push past a crowd of top hats, bonnets, parasols and anxious children to get a better look. And there it is, glinting in the sunlight like a hallucination made of sugar glass, the Crystal Palace. You blink, then you blink again. It's still there. This thing, this towering structure of iron and glass, should not exist. It looks like a greenhouse swallowed a cathedral and then decided to outshine the sun. 600 tons of iron, nearly 1 million panes of glass, no bricks, no mortar, just gleaming transparency. You feel a little dizzy just looking at it. It's 1851, and you're about to step inside the Great Exhibition, a kind of imperial talent show where Britain shows off everything it's built, conquered, mined, or mildly bullied out of other nations. You follow the flow of the crowd, your boots clicking against the polished floor. The inside is even more surreal than the outside. There are trees growing inside this building, full-sized, as if the whole thing is a glass garden built by a Victorian madman with access to both a metal foundry and a very generous budget. And in the centre of it all, progress, or at least a version of it. There are machines that print newspapers at lightning speed, steam engines that hum with polished grace, and inventions with names like pneumatic dispatch system and electrometallic magnetic clock. You pass a display from India, woven fabrics, carved ivory, spices laid out in neat colonial rows. You feel queasy. It's all so beautiful, so meticulously labelled, and so obviously plundered. The empire isn't just on display, it's being curated, like a trophy shelf. There's a giant telescope from Russia, a weird musical instrument from Austria that sounds like a haunted dinner bell, a massive block of American quartz, a set of mechanical looms that could clothe a city in a week. Everywhere you turn, nations boil down to booths, goods, and bragging rights. And towering above it all, looking mildly amused, is Prince Albert in a statue, polished within an inch of his life. This whole thing was his idea. He pushed for it, designed the committee, bullied Parliament into funding it. People laughed at first. A glass palace for machinery, one MP said. What's next? Diamond post offices. But Albert didn't flinch. And now, here you are, surrounded by 100,000 square feet of glistening smugness. You grab a programme and wander deeper. The crowds are dense. Families, scholars, military men, artists, even a few foreign dignitaries all jostling for space, and the Queen herself. She opens the event with the calm precision of a monarch who knows exactly how much power she wields. You hear she cried when she first saw the building. "It is vast," she whispered. And she was right. Here's your quirky fact. The Crystal Palace was built in just 9 months. 9 months. Designed by Joseph Paxton, a former gardener who looked at an enormous greenhouse and said, "Yes, but what if bigger?" You almost respect the audacity. Walking through this place, you start to see how Victorians view the world. Order, spectacle, dominance. There's a sense that everything, nature, people, culture, can be catalogued, tamed, displayed. It's impressive, and just a little disturbing. You pass a group of children marvelling at a model of a steam-powered plough. Behind them, a clergyman examines a Bible printed in 347 languages. Near the French display, 2 women argue about the superiority of British steel. Somewhere in the distance, a German inventor tries to explain his perpetual motion machine to a man who just wants to eat his sandwich in peace. And then you see it. A full printing press, operated in real time, cranking out commemorative flyers. You grab one. It reads, "Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of All Nations." A grand title, but you notice something. The British displays are 3 times the size of anyone else's. All nations, sure, but the empire gets the biggest tent. There's a scholarly debate about this whole thing. Some historians argue the exhibition was a celebration of peace and global unity. Others point out it was basically a massive exercise in self-congratulation and economic propaganda. You're inclined to agree with both. It's diplomacy through dazzle. Outside, the city is buzzing. Hyde Park hasn't been this packed since the last royal scandal. Vendors sell commemorative spoons, fans and postcards. Children wear little cardboard hats shaped like the Crystal Palace. You buy one, you immediately regret it. The exhibition lasts for 6 months. Over 6 million people visit, roughly a third of the entire population of Britain. And when it ends, the building is taken down, pane by pane, and moved to Sydenham, where it lives on as an even bigger symbol of imperial bling. Until, of course, it burns to the ground in 1936. But that's a future problem. For now, the Crystal Palace becomes a monument to ambition, to the belief that anything can be made bigger, faster, better. And for better or worse, it sets the tone for the second half of Victoria's reign. As you leave, blinking into the afternoon sun, you carry a strange mix of awe and unease. This world, so polished, so proud, is built on shaky foundations. But damn if it isn't spectacular to look at. You walk home through the park, still clutching your ridiculous flyer, wondering what they'll show off next. Electricity. Flight. Artificial limbs made of clockwork. The Victorians are wild enough to try anything, and behind it all, somewhere in a darkened palace, Victoria sits in black, mourning her prince, while the empire glitters in his honour. You lace your corset tighter than usual today, not because you want to, but because appearances matter. It's 1872, and you're heading upstairs to serve tea to Lady Ellesmere, who will not only notice if your waist isn't the right circumference, but will mention it, softly, cruelly, and with a smile. Welcome to class wars in crinoline, where the gap between upstairs and downstairs isn't just about architecture, it's about survival. You work in a grand London townhouse, one of those 7-bedroom, 12-fireplace monstrosities that leaks money from the ceilings. You sleep in the attic, next to a window that doesn't shut, and a fellow maid who talks in her sleep. You wake before dawn, wash with freezing water, and descend into the organised chaos of the servants' world. Soot, starch, and silence. The thing no one tells you about Victorian life is that the glitter comes at a cost, and someone else always pays it. For every silk glove a lady wears, there's a girl like you scouring soot from the fireplace with cracked hands. For every roast dinner served, there's a cook who hasn't seen daylight in 3 weeks. Upstairs smells like lavender and beeswax. Downstairs smells like boiled bones and old socks. And yet the hierarchy holds, like a pyramid made of teacups. You nod to the butler, you curtsy to the mistress, you vanish when not needed. You exist in the margins of grandeur, barely seen unless something's out of place. Then you're very seen. Lady Ellesmere's guests are arriving this afternoon. You help set the parlour, fresh-cut roses, lemon cakes, polished teaspoons. The conversation, when it begins, floats down to your ears through floorboards and vents. They're discussing literature, art, whether or not the Irish should be allowed to vote, and, most passionately, fashion. And what a fashion. Upstairs, the women are dressed like exotic birds trapped in cages. Their skirts are impossibly wide thanks to the latest trend, crinolines. Picture a hoop made of steel or horsehair, worn under a gown to give it that floating bell shape. It looks like elegance. It feels like a structural hazard. More than one woman has caught on fire from brushing against a fireplace in a crinoline. You know of a cousin, very hush-hush, who broke her hip trying to sit down too fast in one. But beauty demands sacrifice, and Victorian beauty demands actual blood sometimes. You, of course, don't wear crinolines. You wear whatever your employer has passed down, a second-hand dress badly mended with buttons that don't match. You keep your hair tied back, your mouth shut, and your opinions locked deep inside your corset right next to your lungs. Let's talk about that corset. Every woman wears one, rich or poor. It's not optional, it's identity. It lifts, cinches, shapes. It gives you the silhouette of a Grecian column, but the lung capacity of a raccoon in a shoebox. You've passed out exactly twice while tightening yours. Both times you were told it was just your feminine constitution. There's a debate happening in salons and salons adjacent. Is the corset killing women? Doctors say yes. Fashion magazines say no. One French journal hilariously insists that corsets are good for posture, digestion, and even marital harmony. You suspect they're lying. Even Queen Victoria wore one. Of course she did. But hers were custom-made, probably with better airflow and embroidered monograms. Yours smells like starch and effort. Upstairs, Lady Ellesmere reclines on a fainting couch that probably cost more than your yearly wage. She's wearing a gown dyed with arsenic green, the most fashionable and slightly toxic colour of the season. You know the dye leaches into the skin. You've heard rumours about shop girls getting sores from folding too many bolts of the fabric, but the colour, it's divine. Her guests flutter around her like moths at an art museum. They're all playing the same unspoken game. Who can appear wealthier without seeming like they're trying? Effortless luxury, they call it, as you balance a silver tray with hands that haven't stopped shaking since dawn. Here's your quirky fact for the day. Some Victorians employed dress lifters, small hooks and pulleys attached to their crinolines, allowing them to adjust skirt height with a string or button. It sounds elegant until you imagine tripping a wire and suddenly flashing your ankles in front of the bishop. You return to the scullery, where things feel more honest. Sarah, your fellow maid, is scrubbing potatoes while humming something rude. You both laugh about the guest who mistook a butter knife for a fish knife. That's the only revenge you get, knowing they rely on your competence to maintain their illusion of perfection. Downstairs, life is tough, yes, but there's community. You share secrets over stolen tea biscuits. You exchange glances when a lord gets a little too handsy. You learn how to read expressions like books when someone's angry, embarrassed, or secretly broke. More common than you'd think. You've heard of the servant problem, a phrase the upper class uses to describe the growing difficulty in hiring help. Why? Because more people are leaving service, heading to cities for better paying jobs in factories and shops. Some even open their own businesses. The horror, independence, ambition, upstairs can barely comprehend it. There's a scholar named Beatrice Webb, only recently making a name for herself, who writes that the class system is a tapestry stitched with denial. You don't know what that means, but you like the sound of it, and you like knowing people are starting to question things. Even if you can't say them out loud, you carry those questions like lucky coins. One day, you see a maid refuse to curtsy. Just once. Just a tiny pause in the ritual. The silence that follows is deafening. She's dismissed, of course. But you remember the look in her eye. Tired, clear, unafraid. That night you imagine a world without upstairs and downstairs. No bells, no corsets, no Lady Ellesmere telling you to smile more. Just people, upright and equal, eating lemon cake on their own terms. You fall asleep in your attic bed, crinoline poking you from where you've stuffed it under the cot, lungs sore from another day of ladylike restraint. But your spine, it's still straight. The rain falls in slow, steady sheets, enough to soak your hem and drown your hope, but not enough to cancel anything. Because today, you're going to a rally. You tie your bonnet tighter, pin on a borrowed brooch, for respectability, and step into the swell of voices. It's time. Welcome to votes, riots, and quiet rebels, where polite society meets its rebellious reflection in the streets, in pamphlets, and in you. You're not what anyone would call a firebrand. You're quiet, careful, and suspicious of people who shout. But lately, it's getting harder to stay neutral. The world is changing, and refusing to acknowledge it feels like trying to ignore a train bearing down on you while you're tied to the tracks. And so, here you are, clutching a leaflet and standing next to a woman who smells like soap and fury. The cause? Voting rights. For men at first, all men, not just landowners, and eventually maybe even, gasp, women. You're getting ahead of yourself, but still, the idea has lodged itself into the national conversation like a pebble in a boot. You can't walk without feeling it. This rally is part of the reform movement. Since the first Reform Act of 1832, which gave the vote to slightly more men and crushed women's hopes in a single line, there's been mounting pressure to go further. The working classes want a voice. The radicals want change. The elites want everyone to calm down. You're not calming down. You listen as a speaker takes the platform. He's tall, wiry, and talks like a preacher with a hangover. Are we not citizens? He roars. Do we not pay taxes? Do we not build your roads, bake your bread, sew your coats? The crowd shouts back. A cheer ripples through the damp air like electricity. It's thrilling, terrifying. You half expect to be arrested just for standing here. In your coat pocket is a copy of the People's Charter, drawn up by the Chartists, who've been agitating for reform since the late 1830s. Their demands are simple: universal male suffrage, secret ballots, equal electoral districts, no property qualifications for MPs, and annual elections. Logical, right? The government called it revolutionary. The first time the Chartists submitted a petition, it had 1.3 million signatures. The second, over 3 million. Parliament rejected both, flat out, twice. Democracy apparently is fine in theory, terrifying in practice. Here's your quirky fact. One Chartist rally in 1848 had over 150,000 people gathered on Kennington Common, a sea of hope, frustration, and excellent hats. Authorities panicked and filled London with police and troops. In the end, the rally was peaceful, but the message was clear: we're watching you. And it's not just men pushing for change. You're hearing more and more about early women's rights campaigners. Mary Wollstonecraft laid the groundwork decades ago, but now names like Barbara Bodichon and Lydia Becker are starting to appear in the margins of newspapers. You read their essays by candlelight, heart pounding. But most of the public still laughs. Women voting? What next? Dogs on Parliament? Ha ha ha. You smile politely, then quietly hope their horse throws a shoe in traffic. You meet other quiet rebels at a local reading circle. It started as a book club, but let's be honest, it's become a political cell. You read novels by day and radical pamphlets by night. You discuss Mill, Owen, Marx. Softly, carefully, like sharing recipes for something still technically illegal. There's a woman named Ruth who brings biscuits and revolution in equal measure. She tells you about a printer on Fleet Street willing to run feminist tracts. No names, of course. You spend a rainy afternoon folding copies of The Rights of Women, a voice from the kitchen floor. You hide them inside hymnals. Meanwhile, the upper classes clutch their pearls. Reform, votes, equality, unthinkable. They talk about mob rule, decline of values, the tyranny of the vulgar. You serve tea to one such gentleman and nearly pour it in his lap when he says, "A woman's place is in the nursery or the nunnery, not the ballot box." Instead, you smile, then spit in his sugar bowl. Things escalate in the 1860s with the Second Reform Act. More working-class men get the vote, but only in boroughs, not counties. It's still about land, status, and carefully drawn lines. But the dam is cracking, the noise is growing, and you're starting to write. You don't call yourself a writer, not really. But your letters to the editor are fiery, and your short essays are sharp enough to cut through the fog of public indifference. You use a pseudonym, of course. Miss Hartwell. Sounds safe, harmless. You smile every time someone praises your article and follows it with, "A woman couldn't have written that." In a rare burst of mischief, you print a quote from one of your own essays and frame it for your sitting room. No one suspects a thing. There's a scholarly debate now. Were these early reformers revolutionaries or just pragmatists? Did they want to tear down the system or just fix its hinges? You think they were both. Because sometimes painting the walls isn't enough. Sometimes the whole house needs to burn. You attend a protest where the police show up too early and too aggressively. A young man is struck with a baton. You see his head bleed. Someone screams. You run. Later, the papers say it was a disturbance incited by radicals. You keep the blood-stained flyer as proof otherwise. And yet, even in the darkest moments, the hope remains. Quiet rebels don't shout. They persist. They march even when the streets turn cold. They publish even when the papers won't listen. They educate daughters. They slip ideas into conversations like coins into coat pockets. That night, you walk home past Parliament. It looms, lit from within, a golden cage of tradition. You stare at it for a long time, rain trickling down your spine. You wonder how long it will be until someone inside says your name, or at least someone like you. And you decide you'll keep fighting quietly, loudly, however you can, Because you know now, no matter how long it takes, change doesn't ask permission, it demands it. You're on a train headed north, clutching a borrowed guidebook, trying not to let your hat blow off through the open window. The man across from you is drinking whiskey from a flask shaped like a ram's head. The couple to your right is arguing over whether to spend the night in Inverness or at a haunted inn somewhere near Loch Ness. You don't even know how you got talked into this, but here you are, chasing Highland myths and Gothic revival, like every other Victorian in search of something a little wilder than wallpaper and weak tea. Welcome to Scotland, where the air feels older, the hills look haunted, and suddenly everyone you meet claims to be descended from a Jacobite warrior. The year is 1874 and you've joined the great Victorian tradition of escaping to the Highlands, where the fog is thicker, the legends are bloodier, and you can buy a tartan shawl in every town square for the low price of your dignity. Everyone's doing it. Even the Queen. Especially the Queen. Victoria loved Scotland. After Albert died, she retreated to Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, a royal residence that looks like someone designed it while listening to bagpipes and crying. It's full of turrets, antlers, and cold stone fireplaces. She called it her dear paradise in the Highlands. You visit the gift shop and buy a tin of shortbread shaped like corgis. Here's the twist. Scotland wasn't always this fashionable. In fact, for much of the 18th and early 19th century, it was viewed as backward, dangerous, and embarrassingly resistant to British control. Remember the Jacobite uprisings? Culloden? Bonnie Prince Charlie? The British government spent decades crushing Highland culture, banning tartans, dismantling clans, outlawing bagpipes. Yes, really. And then, in a move that historians still squint at, they changed their minds. Suddenly Scotland became romantic, tragic, marketable. Why? 2 words. Sir Walter Scott. This guy single-handedly rebranded Scottish culture in the early 1800s with a pen, a powdered wig, and a strong sense of narrative drama. His novels, Waverley, Rob Roy, The Bride of Lammermoor, turned rebels into heroes and ruined castles into national treasures. He even helped stage King George IV's visit to Scotland in 1822, the first royal visit in nearly 2 centuries. The king wore a kilt. It looked ridiculous, but it worked. The Victorians bought it wholesale. By the time you arrive, the Gothic revival is in full swing, not just in Scotland, but all over Britain. Architects are putting pointy arches on everything. Turrets, gargoyles, iron railings that look like they could double as vampire repellents. London gets redone in mock medieval style. Even new prisons and post offices look like they were built by Dracula's wedding planner. But in Scotland, it's different. The aesthetic isn't just trendy, it's national identity reborn. Castles are restored with questionable historical accuracy. Tartans come roaring back as markers of clan pride, most of them invented in the last 20 years. You can literally buy a guide that assigns you a clan based on your last name, even if you're from Brighton and allergic to heather. You hike up a hill near Glencoe, breathing in peat smoke and legend. The guide tells you a story about the massacre here in 1692, how the MacDonalds were slaughtered in their sleep by the very soldiers they'd been housing. You glance at the sheep grazing nearby and wonder if they know. Probably. It's easy to fall under the spell. The landscape itself feels dramatic, painted in watercolours and melancholy. Mist crawls through the valleys like it's looking for someone. You pass a loch where the guide insists a monster lives. You nod politely. He pulls out a blurry drawing of what looks like a brontosaurus swimming. You nod again. Here's your quirky fact. Queen Victoria helped popularise the myth of the ancient Highland culture, even though a lot of it was invented during her own reign. She adored the bagpipes. Not quite a traditional instrument of clan gatherings, by the way, insisted on wearing tartan, a pattern chosen by her tailor, and described the locals as noble and rustic, which is Victorian for charming poor people. She even wrote Leaves from the Journal of Our Life in the Highlands, which became a bestseller. It's full of misty mornings, loyal servants, and the occasional dramatic stag. You read it once and nearly fell asleep on page 7, but the illustrations were lovely. There's a scholarly debate now about this whole Scottish reinvention. Was it cultural appreciation or imperial romanticism? Did the Victorians revive a proud identity, or just sanitize and sell it back to themselves like a souvenir mug? You think it's both. Scotland was reborn not as it was, but as the Victorians wanted it to be. Your friend, a lowland Scot with a suspiciously English accent, says it best. We weren't always tragic warriors in plaid, you know. Sometimes we were just tired farmers trying not to freeze to death. Still, you find yourself caught in the fantasy. You visit Edinburgh, where the city climbs like a spine made of blackened stone. The castle looms overhead, full of cannons and coronation dreams. Down in the streets, shops sell tartan everything. Tartan socks, tartan handkerchiefs, even tartan underpants. You buy a pair, instantly regret it. And yet, you don't feel entirely fooled. You know this is a curated history, pressed into postcards. But it's also compelling. There's something about the way the Victorians took ruins and ghosts and made them into fuel for national pride. You suspect they needed stories like this to make sense of a world they were rapidly dismantling and rebuilding in equal measure. The Highland myth is comforting, noble, tragic, and conveniently distant. A way to feel rooted while the empire sails into the future like a steel ship with no brakes. You return to London with windburn, questionable whiskey breath, and a small stone you stole from a ruined abbey. You keep it on your writing desk. Just a reminder that not everything old needs to be accurate to be meaningful. And sometimes, pretending the past was grander than it was helps you survive the present. Especially when the fog rolls in. The heat slams into you the moment you step off the ship. Thick, unrelenting, and humming with a kind of energy that London never has. You're in India now. You blink through the brightness, sweating in places you didn't know could sweat. Adjusting your sun hat as if it might somehow protect your morals, your manners, and your molars. It won't. Welcome to India, ink and insurrection, where the British Empire meets its greatest colony and its most complicated legacy. It's the 1880s, and the Raj is in full imperial bloom. The British have taken over not just governance, but architecture, infrastructure, education, and the most passive-aggressive part of all, language. You pass a school where children are reciting Wordsworth under a banyan tree. The teacher wears a sari and spectacles. Her English is better than yours. You're officially here as part of the administrative class. Unofficially, you're here to learn what exactly Britain thinks it's doing in a country that had literature, mathematics, and toilets, when your ancestors were still drawing deer on cave walls. The contradiction hits hard. You're supposed to represent progress, but every temple, every carved pillar, every crowded market laughs quietly at you. Your bungalow smells like mothballs and mangoes. The servant assigned to you, whom you're told to call boy, even though he's 40, brings your tea with a side of polite contempt. He speaks 3 languages. You can barely remember how to order a curry without insulting someone's grandmother. But let's rewind a bit. India wasn't always run directly by the crown. For over a century, the British presence was managed by a strange, greedy behemoth, the British East India Company, a corporate entity with its own army, its own tax policies, and at one point control over more than 300 million people. You hear that number and your brain shorts out. That's not a business. That's a shadow government. The company wasn't exactly loved. It played kingdoms against each other, squeezed farmers for taxes, and had a spectacular talent for making wealth disappear in one direction, toward London. It built railways and telegraph lines, not to help the locals, but to move soldiers and cotton more efficiently. Progress with a price tag. Then came 1857. You weren't there, obviously, but everyone still talks about it. Officially, it's the Indian Mutiny. Unofficially, and more accurately, it was a full-blown nationwide rebellion. It began with sepoys, Indian soldiers in the company's army, who were furious over a new rifle cartridge greased with pig and cow fat. You'd think, that's a small thing, but it wasn't. For Muslims and Hindus, it was sacrilege, literally. Combine that with decades of economic exploitation, religious meddling and general disdain, and the whole country just snapped. The fighting was brutal. You hear stories from both sides, massacres, retributions, betrayals. Entire cities caught in crossfire. The company barely held on. Eventually the British government stepped in, dissolved the company, and took direct control. That's when Queen Victoria became Empress of India. A woman who's never set foot in the country now rules it from 4,000 miles away. You stand outside a government office in Calcutta, watching a clerk make copies of legal documents under a spinning ceiling fan. He's humming. The paper smells of ink and sweat. And you realise the empire doesn't run on glory, it runs on paperwork. Still, the British pat themselves on the back for bringing order to India. Railways, telegraphs, English medium schools, cricket, civil service exams. Meanwhile, they ignore the famine down the road, caused in part by prioritising cash crops over food. 5 million dead, and the governor says it's unfortunate. You write that word down. You underline it. Here's your quirky fact. India had one of the most advanced textile industries in the world until the British systematically dismantled it. Why? So they could sell British manufactured cloth back to Indians. You see women selling rough cotton dresses by the roadside and wonder how many looms were silenced to make room for Manchester mills. But India isn't silent anymore. Resistance is stirring, not with guns, but with words. You attend a lecture by Dadabhai Naoroji, a dignified, razor-sharp thinker who speaks of the drain of wealth, how Britain extracts India's resources and gives little back. He uses numbers, charts, facts. It's devastatingly calm and completely radical. You sit in the back row, scribbling notes like a schoolchild. You begin to hear the term self-rule, not shouted, just spoken, with care, like planting a seed. You meet a young law student named Mohandas. He's quiet, polite, terrifyingly thoughtful. You ask him what he thinks of the empire. He says, "I think it needs to go." You laugh. He doesn't. You'll remember him. There's a growing movement of Indian intellectuals, reformers and writers. They publish newspapers in English, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali. You read an editorial that compares the empire to a landlord who's never paid rent. You send a copy back to London. It doesn't make it to print. There's an ongoing scholarly debate now. Did the empire modernise India or exploit it under the guise of progress? Some point to the railways and say, "Look what we built." Others point to the famines, the massacres, the looted museums. You think both sides are wrong. It's not a yes or no question. It's a novel with too many authors and a deeply unreliable narrator. You leave India changed. You can't unsee the contradictions. The boys reciting Shakespeare in cities that predate Rome. The temples older than Christ, shadowed by Victorian post offices. The beauty of a nation that doesn't need your approval to exist. On your last night you walk by the Ganges. You hear bells, chants, the rush of water. And behind you, the low hum of an English train pulling into a newly built station. That's the empire, always arriving, always interrupting. You take out your notebook and write. We built railways through Eden, and still wondered why the fruit tasted like ash. Then you get on your ship back to London. But a part of you never leaves. You're not working today, you're lounging. Specifically, you're reclining in a striped canvas chair on a wide green lawn, sipping something chilled and watching a game that makes 0 sense but is somehow very important. Welcome to the elegant absurdity of Lord's leisure and lawn sports. where the Victorian upper class turns sitting still into an Olympic sport and the real game is appearances. It's the 1880s. You've been invited, miraculously, to a country estate for a week of light social recreation. What that actually means is tightly scheduled leisure that involves more rules than a court of law and enough social traps to require constant mental gymnastics. You're wearing a hat. You're always wearing a hat. You've also been told exactly how to applaud and when not to, which is 90% of the time. A game of croquet is unfolding in front of you. You've tried it. Once. It's not just about hitting balls through hoops. It's about strategy, timing, and the gentle art of pretending not to care while absolutely caring. It's like billiards on grass with slightly more eye contact. Everyone is dressed for a painting. Ladies in white muslin with sunshades, gentlemen in linen suits, and expressions of cultivated boredom. You're told the key to leisure is never looking like you're trying. Your entire existence this week is about seeming effortless, even though you nearly fainted getting into your corset this morning, and the grass stains on your gloves are definitely visible if someone looks closely. This world of country leisure is reserved for those who don't actually need to work. The landed gentry, the idle rich, the sort of people who own 4 pairs of gloves just for lawn tennis. And yes, tennis is now a thing. You're told it's called lawn tennis to distinguish it from the original indoor version, which sounds suspiciously like a sport for people with too much carpet. You try to watch a match. It's genteel chaos. Someone shouts, "Love," and you briefly wonder if a proposal is happening. But no, it's just the score. The players are elegant, sun-kissed, and very good at pretending they're not winded. You make a mental note to practice your volley never. Here's your quirky fact. The Victorians invented most of the lawn sports we associate with country clubs today. Croquet, lawn tennis, badminton, even snooker. They were obsessed with structure and rules. So naturally they turned fun into a regulated, rigid pastime. You've seen an entire pamphlet on how to hold a croquet mallet respectfully. You suspect it was ghost-written by a butler. But it's not just games, it's the entire ritual of country leisure. Morning walks through gardens so manicured they probably have names. Afternoon rides through meadows, performed at exactly the right speed to flutter your skirts without risking mud. Evenings filled with piano recitals, poetry readings, and conversations about ancient Greek philosophy, spoken in tones that suggest you actually mean, "I think I fancy you." Every action is coded. You're invited to play charades, not because they need another player, but because someone wants to see how clever you are under pressure. You end up miming Othello with a parasol. It does not go well. Beneath the laughter and lemonade, you feel the pressure. This isn't just leisure, it's social theatre. You're being evaluated. Your accent, your table manners, your ability to look interested in the Duke's long story about his new greenhouse. You once yawned at the wrong moment during a discussion on ferns and were silently disinvited from a future boating trip. Still, there's something intoxicating about it. The rhythm, the rituals, the soft hum of luxury that smooths over life's rough edges. You begin to understand why people crave this world, even as it quietly devours your individuality and replaces it with lace and polite nodding. And yet this idyllic country life doesn't reflect most of Britain. Beyond the hedges and ha-has, the Irish question looms. You hear murmurs over tea. The Irish are demanding independence again. Another Home Rule bill, can you imagine? They'll be wanting roads next. Everyone chuckles uneasily. The situation is serious. Ireland, still under British rule, is agitating for self-governance. The Home Rule movement is gaining traction, and many in Parliament are divided. Some see it as reasonable, others as the beginning of the end for the empire. You recall the Great Famine not so long ago, where 1 million Irish starved and another million emigrated. while the British government hesitated and then sent aid with the enthusiasm of someone reluctantly donating their least favourite shoes. The scars are deep, and they're not fading. But here, in this world of tennis whites and clinking glasses, such topics are whispered, if mentioned at all. Politics are considered vulgar unless you're a sitting MP. Even then, you're supposed to keep things abstract. The Irish situation is delicate, someone says. That's Victorian for let's not discuss the fire on the other side of the house while we're drinking wine. There's an open scholarly debate. Was Victorian leisure a true escape or a smokescreen? Did it offer genuine rejuvenation or simply mask the widening cracks in Britain's social and imperial fabric? You, sweating discreetly in your fourth best dress, suspect it's both. You walk the gardens alone one evening. The sky is lavender, the birds are louder than the people, and everything smells like warm grass and money. You think of your friends back in the city, working 16 hours a day for half a loaf of bread and a room with 3 other people. You think of the Irish families being evicted from their land, and then you think of the woman beside you at lunch who cried because someone used the wrong napkin ring. The dissonance rings in your ears. Later, at the final garden party, you're handed a glass of champagne and told to smile for a photograph, a new technology that's just becoming fashionable. You pose with the rest of the guests, holding your croquet mallet like it means something. The shutter clicks, and you wonder, what will people think when they look at this picture in 100 years? Will they see joy or denial? You wake up to the smell of something bad. Not just someone burned the toast, bad. Call the coroner bad. The Thames is glistening with a shade of green you're fairly certain doesn't occur in nature. Your neighbour just vomited into a boot, and the local paper's front page headline reads, "Cholera returns, still very much in style." Welcome to plagues, poisons and bad plumbing, where everything from your water to your wallpaper might kill you, and medicine is doing its best with leeches, mustard poultices and hopeful shrugs. It's the late 1850s and you've been very ill. You've also been very afraid. Everyone is. Because in the age of steam power and empire, people are still dying from things you can't see and barely understand. Cholera, typhoid, scarlet fever, diphtheria, tuberculosis. If you haven't had at least one Victorian disease by now, are you even trying? Your local doctor is cheerful, well-dressed, and completely guessing. His treatments include bleeding, blistering, and sometimes offering you brandy until you forget you're sick. His office smells like camphor, despair, and a little bit of lavender. You sit there, wheezing, while he scribbles a note for a tonic made with mercury and crushed pearls. You're told it might clear your lungs or kill you. The line is thin. Let's start with cholera, the real Victorian rock star of death. It's caused by contaminated water, but for decades people blamed miasma, or bad air. Yes, air. You remember the moment the theory cracked. John Snow, not the one from the wall, mapped a cholera outbreak in Soho in 1854 and traced it to a water pump. He removed the handle. The outbreak stopped. The science was right there, dripping from the spigot. But did the city change overnight? Of course not. That would be logical. Instead, they kept pumping sewage into the Thames, because out of sight, out of mind, and into your teacup. Then came the great stink of 1858. The heatwave turned the Thames into a fetid ribbon of liquefied human regret. Parliament literally fled the building because the smell was so overwhelming. Curtains were soaked in chloride of lime, noses were stuffed with handkerchiefs, and a few members of Parliament reportedly tried to debate legislation while gagging. Silver lining? This finally led to real infrastructure. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, your new unsung hero of plumbing. He designs a massive sewage system that starts turning London from a giant latrine into something slightly less horrifying. You walk over one of his underground interceptors and silently thank him every time you don't get cholera. But it's not just water. Everything in your Victorian life might be trying to kill you, like your wallpaper. Specifically the green kind. Arsenic green. Popular, chic, and slightly glowing. Entire parlours are covered in it. It flakes off, gets into the air, and gives you rashes, headaches, and eventually organ failure. Still, the colour's lovely. Or your cosmetics, laced with lead, mercury, and crushed beetles. The fashionable look is pale with a hint of near death. Rouge is applied lightly. If it smells funny, that's just the arsenic talking. Even your clothes are dangerous. Hats dyed with aniline chemicals that stain your scalp. Crinolines that catch fire. Corsets made with whalebone that snap inwards when they break, turning your torso into a piñata. You once read about a woman whose hairpiece exploded because it was placed too close to a gaslight. And food? Forget it. Milk is watered down and re-whitened with chalk. Bread contains alum. Sweets are dyed with lead acetate, giving that delightful, lick-the-poison finish. You buy sausages from a butcher you think you trust, but they're suspiciously green under the gaslight. You chew slowly. You pray. Here's your quirky fact. Victorian England didn't regulate food safety until the 1860s, and even then, the laws were toothless. Until then, the entire food industry operated on a dare. You admire the survivors. And speaking of regulation, hospitals are finally improving, mostly thanks to women like Florence Nightingale, who returns from the Crimean War with a passion for statistics and a bone to pick with filthy wards. She introduces sanitation, nurse training, and the idea that maybe wiping the pus off with the same rag isn't ideal. Revolutionary. Still, the average Victorian lives close to death. You can hear it in the coughs, see it in the black-edged morning stationery, feel it in the weight of every minor illness. Even the wealthy aren't safe. Prince Albert dies of typhoid. Children of royalty succumb to fevers unnamed. There's no safe class when the water's dirty and the science is behind. There's a scholarly debate now. Was Victorian public health reform driven by compassion or fear of rebellion? After all, epidemics hit the poor hardest, but the poor live next to the rich. Disease doesn't respect class lines. You suspect the answer is both morality and self-preservation, as always. You remember when your neighbour's child died of diphtheria? A tiny white coffin. The priest saying comforting things no one believed. You passed the parlour in the evening and saw the family sitting in silence, the air thick with disinfectant and sorrow. That's the thing about the Victorian era. It makes death part of the decor. Mourning customs are elaborate. You wear black for months. You pose with dead relatives in photographs. You keep a lock of hair in a locket. Death isn't hidden, it's styled. But slowly the science pushes forward. Vaccines start to spread. Public baths appear. Clean water trickles in. You still boil everything. You still sniff your milk like a detective. But you also start to believe that survival is possible, even probable. And when you finally recover from your most recent bout of mysterious Victorian illness, let's call it consumptive ague with hysteria flare-ups, you step outside, take a deep breath, and almost cough up a lung. The smog is thick, but at least it's not cholera. Progress, slowly, painfully, but progress nonetheless. You're standing in a room full of machines that sound like they're gasping for air. Gears turning, steam hissing, belts whirring, every surface polished, every man slick with sweat and soot. Welcome to the industrial inferno, where cotton threads and coal dust shape the future, and where the Victorian dream smells suspiciously like burnt oil and mild panic. It's Manchester, Cottonopolis as they're calling it now, and it is alive. The city never really sleeps, it just naps and shifts. Chimneys belch smoke day and night. The streets echo with iron wheels and wooden carts, and everyone moves like they're slightly behind schedule, which they are. You squint through the haze and try to find the beauty in it, which is hard when you've just stepped in something wet and unidentifiable. The Industrial Revolution isn't over. It's evolving. Bigger factories, faster machines, more everything. And you're here to see how progress looks when it's mass-produced, measured in output, and marketed as destiny. Your first stop, a cotton mill. From the outside, it looks like a fortress. Inside, it's a cacophony of sound and motion. Rows of looms run by girls who look 10 but are probably older, or possibly younger. Their fingers move like hummingbirds, tying threads, fixing snags. No one talks. Not because they're shy, but because it's too loud. You meet a doffer, a child whose job is to replace the full bobbins on the spinning machines. Every few minutes he darts between gears that could break his bones like breadsticks. He's missing a fingertip. You don't ask. The air is thick with lint, the kind that clogs lungs and dreams. They call it mill fever. You last 15 minutes before stepping outside to cough up what feels like half your ancestors, but the output's staggering. Bolts of cloth, miles of yarn, everything white and soft and exported across the globe, all made by hands too small and spines too bent. It's no wonder Britain rules half the world. It's got the looms to dress it. You wander next through an ironworks, where men forge railway parts and industrial dreams with hammers the size of your arm. Sparks fly. The air burns. One man, shirtless, grimy, and smiling like he just survived a duel, offers you a drink from a tin mug. You decline. He shrugs, then pours it over a burn on his forearm. You try not to scream. The railways, by the way, are still expanding everywhere. You can now go from London to Birmingham in under 5 hours, assuming the train doesn't derail, explode or stop because of cow-related issues. The country is shrinking. Villages become towns. Towns become cities. You see a map of new railway lines and it looks like veins on a heart that's beating far too fast. And then there's the coal, the black soul of the empire. Mined in Wales, the Midlands, the North. Hauled by men with lamps on their heads and soot in their lungs. You descend into a mine once just to see. It's colder than you expect, but the air feels alive with danger. They call them pit ponies. The animals used to haul carts underground. Some never see the sun again. You ask one miner how he handles the risk of cave-ins and gas explosions. He says, you get up, you go down, you hope. Then he spits and goes back to work. Here's your quirky fact. Some Victorian coal mines used canaries to detect gas leaks. If the bird died, you ran. The logic is cruel, but undeniably effective. Back in the city, you notice how many buildings are covered in a layer of grime that seems permanent. Churches, schools, children. Everything is grey, even the rain. The workers live in back-to-back terraces. Tiny brick houses with outdoor toilets and ceilings low enough to damage optimism. You meet a mother with 6 children and 2 rooms. Her husband works 14 hours a day. She takes in laundry. Her eldest son is 12 and already has a limp from standing at a loom too long. You ask how she copes. She says, "We laugh a lot. Doesn't fix anything, but it keeps the devil out of the kitchen." Still, not everything is misery. There are working men's clubs, cooperative societies, and even libraries funded by philanthropists and industrialists who are starting to feel the heat of public scrutiny. You see kids reading Dickens by gaslight and women attending lectures on hygiene and child-rearing. Hope, like mould, finds a way. And there's innovation, so much it feels breathless. The telegraph is shrinking the world, the sewing machine is changing fashion, gaslight turns night into day, and you hear whispers of a machine, a calculating engine, designed by Charles Babbage, with assistance from Ada Lovelace, the woman who might just be the first computer programmer. There's a scholarly debate now. Did the Industrial Revolution liberate the working classes or enslave them to machines? Some say it created the middle class. Others say it buried the poor under soot and silence. You think they're both right. Progress is messy, And no one bothered to ask the children working 16-hour shifts if they were enjoying it. And yet you leave the city with awe in your bones. Not admiration, not exactly, but awe. That something so brutal, so loud, so joyless at times could also create things of beauty, convenience, and connection. As your train rattles back toward London, you look out at the passing chimneys and wonder, is this what the future always feels like? Loud, dirty, dazzling, terrifying. You sip your tea, barely hot, overly sweet, and realise you don't have an answer, only more smoke on the horizon. It's the kind of morning where you're convinced your newspaper is judging you. Front page, an outrage upon decency, the woman. Question again. You sip your tea slowly, wondering how many outrages the Victorians can survive before they explode from moral indignation. Welcome to Corsets Off, the rise of the new woman, where the lace begins to unravel and women start walking just a little bit faster, with a pen in one hand and a protest pamphlet in the other. It's the 1890s, and something is definitely shifting. You can feel it in the language, in the fashion, in the way women are starting to look you directly in the eye in public, unapologetically, maybe even a little defiantly. And you're intrigued, nervous, possibly excited. You button your collar a little higher, then lower, then higher again. At the centre of this cultural earthquake is a phrase whispered with both fear and fascination. The new woman. She rides a bicycle. She reads forbidden novels. She might smoke. She probably writes. And worst of all, she thinks, you first encounter her at a railway station. She's wearing rational dress, which is Victorian code for pants, or at least something not designed to cause spinal damage. Her skirt is loose, her bodice unboned, and she's carrying a typewriter case. You ask where she's headed. Wherever I like, she says and smiles. You pretend you weren't just a little in love. Let's break it down. The new woman isn't just a fashion statement. She's a full-blown ideological shift. Educated, independent, increasingly urban. She represents the daughters of the middle class who've been to university or snuck into lectures, read Mill, quoted Ibsen, and aren't afraid to say they'd rather not get married just to secure housing. Marriage, you discover, is one of the battlegrounds. The traditional Victorian ideal, the angel in the house, devoted, silent, tirelessly domestic, is cracking. You read essays debating whether marriage should be reformed, abolished, or at least renegotiated. Some women demand property rights, others demand sexual autonomy. A few demand both, and the newspapers have a collective fainting fit. One article in Punch suggests that giving women voting rights will lead to the collapse of civilization, the rise of trousers at dinner, and tea served without lemon. You laugh. Then you cry a little. Then you write a very sharp letter to the editor, signed only "A Reader Who Knows Better." Here's your quirky fact. The late Victorian period saw a surge in women's cycling clubs, which were controversial not because of the exercise, but because of the perceived freedom. A woman on a bike didn't need a chaperone. She could go anywhere. She could leave. The horror. You attend a lecture titled "Female Education, a Blessing or a Burden." Half the room is women. The other half is men looking increasingly uncomfortable. The speaker, a confident lady in a crisp suit with hair like a bird of prey, opens with, "I am not here to ask permission." You drop your pencil in admiration. You start noticing changes everywhere. Women's colleges are opening, slowly, cautiously, and with heavy regulation, but they're opening. At Girton College, women study Latin, philosophy, and science. They take exams, they beat the boys' scores. The boys are not happy. There's a literary revolution underway too. You browse the shelves and find names like Sarah Grand, Olive Schreiner, Vernon Lee. Their heroines don't swoon. They argue. They leave their husbands. They challenge God. Sometimes they die tragically to appease the audience, but not always. Sometimes they win. Even in the theatre, the new woman is stomping onto the stage. You watch Ibsen's A Doll's House and feel the entire audience freeze when Nora closes the door on her husband and her children. That sound, the click of finality, is louder than 1,000 sermons. A woman choosing self over duty. Scandalous. Electric. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. There's a backlash. Critics accuse new women of destroying the family, of being frigid, hysterical, or, the worst insult of all, unfeminine. They're caricatured in cartoons with masculine jaws, bicycles between their legs, and militant banners reading "Down with Men." You buy one of the prints and frame it ironically. Still, you know this isn't the majority. For most women, life remains tightly corseted, literally and metaphorically. Domestic service is still the #1 employer. Wages are low. Legal rights are few. A married woman has no claim to her earnings, her body, or even her children. Divorce is difficult, scandalous, and often financially ruinous. So while the new woman might terrify the establishment, she's also giving voice to the voiceless. She's a symbol of what's possible, not for everyone yet, but for someone. And that's enough to shake the foundations. You meet one in person, her name is Constance, and she writes articles under 3 pseudonyms for 3 different journals. She's witty, sharp-eyed, and refuses to wear gloves. You ask her if she considers herself a suffragist. No, she says, I consider myself a person. Then she lights a cigarette and offers you one. You don't smoke, but you take it anyway, for the mood. There's a scholarly debate about all of this naturally. Was the new woman a real social movement or just a literary invention? Did she represent change or merely the fantasy of it? Some historians argue she was an upper-middle-class myth. Others insist she laid the groundwork for modern feminism. You sit somewhere in the middle, sipping your tea and reading yet another essay with footnotes and just the right amount of fury. Because something is happening. You can feel it. Not in explosions, but in erosion. The slow, relentless wearing down of the rules, the roles, the expectations. The future isn't here yet, but it's on the train, and it's riding third class, reading a banned novel with a smirk. One day, you visit a photography studio where a woman is having her portrait taken. Not in pearls, not in lace, but in a dark jacket and a high-collared shirt. She stands, not sits. She looks directly at the camera, her expression unreadable. You stare at the print long after she's gone. This is it, you think. The woman who isn't waiting to be asked anything. You're at the theatre again tonight, which is slowly becoming your second home. This time, though, it's not Shakespeare or a morally instructive melodrama about a fallen woman who coughs herself to death in Act 3. No, tonight is different. The curtain rises to reveal a single man in a green velvet coat, holding a cigarette like it's part of his bone structure. He smiles. The audience leans in. You have officially entered the world of aesthete, artist, and Oscar Wilde. It's the 1890s, and the very air seems to be changing texture, becoming lighter, stranger, more scented with lilies and scandal. The age of earnestness is cracking, and through it slips something else. Decadence, wit, and the wild idea that maybe, just maybe, art doesn't need to be useful. It can just be beautiful, or strange, or completely pointless. And somehow, this feels incredibly dangerous. The movement calls itself aestheticism, and its motto is whispered in every smoky drawing room. Art for art's sake. A radical idea, actually. In a world that's industrialised, imperialised, and moralised within an inch of its life, here come a group of people who say, actually, beauty is enough. You can hear Victorian factory owners screaming into their ledgers from here. It's not just Wilde. Though let's be honest, Oscar Wilde is the glittering centre of this aesthetic solar system. He's tall, magnetic, and speaks like he's being quoted by the universe in real time. You see the importance of being earnest, and nearly black out from how sharp it is. Jokes stacked on jokes, polished like mirrors, and yet somehow devastatingly true. You watch upper-class twits reveal their complete idiocy, all while eating cucumber sandwiches and debating the merits of honesty in love. It's all terribly silly, and biting as a scalpel. Wild writes like he's balancing a teacup on a volcano. Outside the theatre, aestheticism creeps into every corner of life. People are decorating their homes with peacock feathers, Japanese screens and sunflowers, the symbolic flower of the movement. Wallpaper is no longer just green. It's moss-shadowed emerald. Even tableware gets redesigned. You sip tea from a cup so delicate you're afraid your sarcasm might shatter it. And then there's fashion. Gone are the stiff corsets, well, less stiff, replaced by loose-flowing garments inspired by classical Greek robes. The pre-Raphaelite look becomes the ideal. Pale, dreamy women with wild red hair, staring wistfully at nothing in particular, usually near a fountain. You meet a painter named Basil who insists he only paints the soul. He invites you to a studio full of half-finished portraits and bowls of overripe fruit. You ask him what it all means. He says, "Meaning is vulgar." Then he feeds you a fig and tells you the wallpaper is hand-stitched by virgins. Let's not forget Aubrey Beardsley, whose black and white illustrations are turning magazines into objects of obsession and censorship. He draws women with serpents for hair, men with shadows like knives, and no one looks wholesome. You buy a copy of the Yellow Book and hide it under your mattress like it's illegal pornography, which, depending on who's Prime Minister, it practically is. Here's your quirky fact. Wilde's wardrobe included green carnations, which he and his circle wore as a kind of secret symbol, possibly of queerness, possibly of irony. No one ever confirmed it outright. That was the point. Half the thrill was in not knowing what was being said. But of course the glitter only goes so far, because this is Victorian England, and the closer something dances to joy, freedom, or queer identity, the more likely someone will try to smash it with a hammer. In 1895, the hammer falls. Wilde, at the height of his fame, is arrested. The charge? Gross indecency with other males. You see the news on the front page and feel your stomach drop. The trial is public, vicious, and humiliating. He defends himself with elegance and wordplay, but it's not enough. He's sentenced to 2 years of hard labour. The press revels in it. The moralists smirk. The same people who laughed at his plays now denounce him as a pervert. His friends disappear. His name becomes radioactive. You attend one of the last performances of Ernest before it's pulled from the theatres. There's a silence in the room that feels like grief, because it wasn't just Wilde, it was everything he stood for. Art that wasn't apologising. Life that wasn't pretending. There's a scholarly debate still raging. Was aestheticism an elite indulgence or a quiet rebellion? Did it challenge power, or just repackage it with prettier paper? You think the answer lies in the way Wilde wrote, laughing at the system from inside the drawing room until the system kicked him out into the street. You visit his grave years later in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. It's covered in lipstick marks. Fans from around the world come to leave notes, flowers, kisses. You leave a green carnation and say nothing. What's there to say? And yet, Wilde's fall doesn't end the movement. If anything, it cements it. The decadent era bleeds into modernism, which will soon arrive with sharper lines, starker truths, and less wallpaper. But something has already changed. The idea that art can challenge society simply by existing on its own terms, that idea has taken root. You return to your apartment and find yourself noticing the curve of your teacup, the shadow of light on the floor, the way the city feels strangely alive after dusk. Beauty, it turns out, wasn't just decoration, it was defiance. And somewhere, in a smoky theatre or a forgotten corner of Bloomsbury, someone is still whispering Wilde's most dangerous idea. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. It's a grey, windswept afternoon, and you're staring at a factory in the distance, not with dread this time, but with a notebook in your hand. Because tonight, we're not talking about gears or soot, we're talking about ideas. Welcome to Brains, Books and the Victorian Mind, where the empire runs on steam, but the real power is what's quietly simmering in libraries, lecture halls, and the worn corners of countless notebooks. The Victorians are thinking, and thinking hard. Philosophy, science, history, poetry, politics, spiritualism, socialism, Darwinism, Pickerism, and someone's currently writing 1,000 pages about it in fine cursive. If the Industrial Revolution built the body of the Victorian age, this is the era building its brain. You begin in a place that smells like wood polish and ink, the British Museum reading room, round, grand, quiet as a cathedral. You step inside and immediately feel underdressed and possibly unworthy. The man at the desk is reading 6 books at once. Another scribbles furiously into a leather-bound journal. You sit down and open your notebook. It feels like a sacred act. Seated a few tables away is a bearded man muttering to himself. You later learn it's Karl Marx, who basically lives here, surrounded by stacks of economic theory, sociological studies, and very bad coffee. He's been here for years, writing what will eventually become Das Kapital. You lean in, try to read over his shoulder, fail. The Victorian intellectual world is vibrating with tension. The country is modernising, but no one quite agrees on what modern means. Some cling to religious certainty, others embrace secularism, science, or socialism. It's not one grand movement, it's a kaleidoscope of conflicting visions, each sharper than the last. Let's talk about Charles Darwin, because oh boy did he drop a bomb. When On the Origin of Species was published in 1859, it hit like a comet. Evolution by natural selection. Humans descended from apes. Cue the pearl clutching, the furious sermons, the Victorian cartoonist drawing Darwin with a monkey's body. You've seen the illustrations. You can't unsee them. But not everyone panics. Some embrace it, some twist it, and some invent entire new ideologies around it. Social Darwinism, for example, which says survival of the fittest applies to society too. You suspect the people pushing that idea are mostly the ones who've already inherited large estates and don't want to feel bad about it. You sit in on a university lecture, at Cambridge of course, where a professor debates whether science has replaced God or just renamed him. You watch as a student in a cravat quotes Tennyson, "Nature, red in tooth and claw," then sits down like he just dropped the mic. Everyone nods solemnly. Speaking of literature, the Victorian era is an absolute goldmine. You've got Dickens giving voice to the poor through his tortured orphans and crooked lawyers. George Eliot, a woman named Mary Ann Evans writing under a man's name because the literary world still isn't ready. Exploring morality and realism with surgical precision. Thomas Hardy, giving you landscapes so emotional they might cry on your behalf. You read Middlemarch for the first time, and about 50 pages in you realise you're actually weeping over a philosophical debate between two characters. Congratulations, you are now intellectually unwell in the most Victorian way possible. And then there's Matthew Arnold standing on a metaphorical beach, mourning the retreat of religious faith and wondering what could possibly fill the void. He's not alone. The Victorian crisis of faith is real and agonising. Science is revealing more and more about the world, but it's also unravelling the comfort of a universe with clear moral order. Which is probably why so many Victorians go looking elsewhere. You attend a spiritualist séance in a London parlour. The host wears silk gloves. The medium claims to channel Queen Elizabeth I. You suppress a laugh until the table actually tilts. You're not sure if it's real, rigged or both, but everyone leaves looking like they've seen God, or at least her ghost. You notice the rise of self-help books too. Titles like Character, The True Gentleman, or How to Live on £30 a Year Without Sinning. There's an obsession with moral improvement, with elevating the mind, with being better. You try one of the exercises. It tells you to avoid idle thoughts. You spend the next hour trying not to think about cake and failing. Here's your quirky fact. There was a widespread fear that overreading would cause reading hysteria, especially in women. Some doctors genuinely believed that novels could overstimulate the female brain and lead to madness. You smile and pick up another book. There's a scholarly debate about the Victorian intellectual. Were they truly radical, or just rearranging the same furniture? Was all this new knowledge breaking chains, or just creating new ones in prettier fonts? You think the answer lies in how much it hurts to think this hard. Because you feel it. The strain of balancing morality, progress, identity, and uncertainty without falling over. And yet, it's thrilling. To be in an age where everything is being questioned. What is God? What is man? What is justice? What is a woman? What does it mean to be civilized? To be free? You walk past a bookshop and see a new volume in the window, Women and Economics by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Next to it, The Subjection of Women by John Stuart Mill. Then a novel titled The Heavenly Twins, a feminist bomb disguised as domestic fiction. The Victorians have opinions and they're putting them in hardcovers. Even the streets are alive with thought. You pass newsboys shouting headlines, pamphlets stuffed into fences, speakers in Hyde Park standing on boxes, shouting about taxes and labour rights and the meaning of life. You stop to listen. You never want to leave. But eventually the lamps flicker on. The reading room closes. The lecture hall empties. You sit alone in your rented flat, scribbling notes under a sputtering gaslight. And it hits you. The true miracle of the Victorian mind wasn't that they had answers. It's that they asked better and better questions. You're tired. Not just from walking the city all day, but from thinking. This era, this loud, smoky, glittering, smog-wrapped century, is wearing you out in the most thrilling way possible. You sit at the back of a smoky club in Soho, watching a man stand up and announce, "Tonight, I am not your entertainment. I am your revolution." You've just entered the final feverish act, an empire at its edge. It's 1900, the last year of the century. The air smells like coal and endings. Victoria is still alive. Just. She's in mourning black still. She hasn't smiled publicly in decades, and Britain treats her like a monument you don't dare criticise. But everyone knows, this is the twilight. And what a century it's been. The Queen has reigned for 63 years, longer than most of her subjects have been breathing. Under her, Britain became the largest empire in human history. The sun never sets, they say. But as you squint at the headlines, war, protests, revolts, you start to think it's getting darker anyway. Let's talk about the empire. It covers nearly a quarter of the globe now. India, Australia, Canada, South Africa, Egypt, Hong Kong. You're running out of pins for your map. The schoolbooks back in London call it the white man's burden, a phrase that makes you want to set fire to your bookshelf. The Victorians say they're bringing civilization, but you've seen what's being taken in return. Gold, labour, lives. You read a report from Africa. The Boer War is raging in South Africa. British troops versus Dutch settlers who've also decided they belong there more than anyone else. You think about the native African populations caught in the middle, treated like footnotes in their own country. You visit a hospital where soldiers are being treated for dysentery and bullet wounds. A nurse tells you quietly that Lord Kitchener has begun putting Boer civilians into camps, not holiday camps, the other kind. Whole families locked behind barbed wire. You ask, are they calling them concentration camps yet? She nods. Your stomach turns. But back in London, The war is presented with music and parades. People wave Union Jacks and sing God Save the Queen like it's a football chant. You realise something. Britain doesn't see its empire. Not really. It sees the maps, the colours, the trade routes, but not the bodies. Not the cost. Still, dissent is growing. You attend a rally organised by Labour activists, a new political force rising from the cracked cobblestones of industrial cities. They're tired of factories that eat workers alive, of landlords who raise rents while wages stall, of a system built on coal dust and hypocrisy. A woman stands to speak. She's got a child on her hip and a stack of unpaid bills in her handbag. "We are the builders," she says, "but our hands are empty." The crowd goes quiet, then cheers. The Victorians had liberalism, yes, but this is something deeper. The beginning of socialism in the public eye. A belief that maybe, just maybe, the wealth of a nation should help the people who create it. And what about the monarchy? Still strong but creaking. There's gossip in the papers about Edward, Victoria's son, Bertie, to his friends and most of his mistresses. He's been waiting in the wings for decades, lounging in casinos, attending Parisian parties, and wearing a monocle with suspicious enthusiasm. Everyone's wondering what happens after Victoria. The Queen's own empire feels increasingly foreign to her. Her letters, once confident and commanding, now sound weary. You read one where she writes, "I long for peace, for quiet, for rest." You feel a pang of sympathy. And then you remember how many people across the globe have been denied rest under her flag. Here's your quirky fact. Victoria was the first British monarch to ride a train, use a telephone, and be photographed. Yet she never liked electric lighting. She said it made her look too pale. You wonder what she'd think of selfies. In the art world, the Victorian aesthetic is mutating. The lace and lilies of the aesthetic movement are giving way to Art Nouveau. Curves, glass, nature made into furniture. Architects are playing with steel and glass like toys. You walk past a newly built hotel that looks like a cake made of iron and stained glass. You love it. You hate it. You don't know. You see men in the streets wearing hats that don't match the fashion plates, women with shorter hemlines, or hair pinned in less than pious ways. There's something brewing beneath the surface. The Edwardian age is almost here, and it's bringing motorcars, cinema, jazz and war. Because yes, war is coming. Not colonial skirmishes, not small conflicts in someone else's backyard, but real war. European powers are stacking weapons, building alliances and inventing military tech like it's a party trick. You overhear a general say, "We're due for another great war soon. It'll be over by Christmas, I'm sure." You nearly drop your glass. Back in your flat, you light a lamp and stare out the window. London looks golden from here. The river reflects the gas lamps. Children laugh below. You can almost forget. But then the wind shifts, and you hear a factory whistle, a carriage clatter, a far-off scream. The century is ending, and no one seems quite ready. There's celebration, but also fear. A scholarly debate lingers. Did the Victorian era truly end in 1901, or did its ghost stretch into the 20th century, clinging to corsets and class systems like perfume on old lace? You think about that. Maybe an era never ends. Maybe it just changes clothes. Queen Victoria dies in January 1901, peacefully, in her sleep. The woman who reigned over steamships, telegrams, famine, revolutions, and the birth of modernity is gone. You watch the funeral procession in silence. It is so long, draped in black, muffled drums, horses, flowers, soldiers from every corner of the empire, and behind it all, an unspoken truth. This is the end of something. You don't cheer. You don't cry. You just bow your head. Then you go home and light a candle, not in mourning but in recognition. Because now the world is waking up, and nothing will be quite so Victorian again. The candle's still burning as you sit by the window, watching the smoke curl upward like a ghost you're not quite ready to say goodbye to. Outside, London is hushed. There's no car horn, no jazz band yet, no bustle of roaring 20s just around the corner. It's still the long sigh between one century and the next. This is Echoes and Embers, the Victorian legacy, where we look back one last time at the life and afterlife of a world that reshaped everything. It's early 1901 and the Queen is gone. The people still speak of her with reverence, even those who opposed everything she stood for. She was the symbol of the age, even when the age was changing faster than she could keep up. Her funeral was watched by millions across the empire. Her shadow is still stretching long across every hall, palace and slum. But with Victoria's death comes something strange. Self-reflection. For decades, the Victorians were too busy doing things, conquering, building, inventing, preaching, to ask what it all meant. Now they're finally pausing to look at what they've made, and what they've broken. You walk through a park built during the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, a place meant to show the glory of the empire. The fountain is cracked. The statues are a little too proud. A child chases a pigeon across the grass and accidentally knocks over a plaque commemorating the Great Colonial Exhibition. You don't pick it up, because legacy is complicated. Let's start with the good. Victorian science, despite the arsenic and questionable facial hair, laid the groundwork for modern medicine, physics and biology, germ theory, anesthesia, X-rays, vaccines, public sanitation systems that actually work, mostly. You no longer fear every sip of water. Progress. Their engineers left you bridges, tunnels, underground trains, and towering stations that still function more than a century later. Their libraries, built with philanthropy and ambition, are still filled with people seeking knowledge. They gave you Dickens, Darwin, the vote, eventually. They asked the big questions, and they cared about the answers. They also gave you bureaucracy, red tape, strict dress codes, and an unshakable fear of not using the correct fork. There's a lot to be thankful for, and a lot to gently throw in the bin. But the darker legacy? Well, that's harder. The British Empire, at its height a globe-spanning behemoth, left behind deep scars. Borders drawn in ignorance, cultures suppressed, resources drained, languages outlawed. You speak with a man from Kenya who still carries the last name given to his grandfather by a colonial official who couldn't pronounce his real one. You apologise. He shrugs. You didn't do it, he says, but you're standing in the house it built. And then there's the moral double standard. The Victorians loved virtue, in theory, but the reality? Poverty hidden behind charity balls, sex policed by the state, yet rampant behind curtains, children made to pray at school, then pick lint out of machinery at dawn. You walk past a church with gold trim and stained glass windows, knowing it was funded by sugar plantations and quiet exploitation. Here's your quirky fact. Some of the earliest motion pictures ever filmed were of Queen Victoria's funeral procession. The woman who defined the pre-electric age ended up on celluloid. Black and white, grainy, silent, immortal. There's an open scholarly debate, one that will probably never close. Was the Victorian era a triumph or a tragedy? The birth of modernity or the last gasp of empire? Some historians call it an age of progress. Others call it a velvet-wrapped nightmare. You think about everything you've seen, the foggy streets and flickering lamps, the cries of street children and the endless thrum of factories, the poetry, the inventions, the laughter over badly boiled beef, the silk of a dress in a ballroom, the shouts of protest in the square, the long railway stretching to nowhere. You think of the Queen, mourning for decades, of Wilde, writing beauty into the margins of ruin, of a suffragist quietly pinning a pamphlet to a public bench, of a coal miner coughing into his sleeve. of a new woman riding a bicycle into the future, petticoats flying like a flag. You can't simplify it, and you shouldn't try, because that's the real Victorian legacy: complexity. An age that cracked open the world, filled it with invention, division, ideas, illusions, that dared to imagine greatness, but often at someone else's expense. The embers are still glowing. You see it in your city's architecture, in the laws and customs, in the strange habits you didn't realise were inherited, why you shake hands, how you line up, the fact that you still think Sunday is for guilt and paperwork. But you also see it in resistance, in the things people are still undoing, rebuilding, rethinking. You fold your notebook and look out at the city. Smoke is rising from chimneys, but so is something else. The modern age is coming, louder, faster, with flashing lights and war drums and votes for women and entirely too much jazz. The world is about to change, again, and the Victorians, they'll be there, in the shadows, in the walls, in the books and bones of the cities they built. Some whispering warnings, some whispering pride, some are still clinging to a crown that doesn't shine quite like it used to. You take one last walk through the fog. You know it's artificial now, gaslight replaced by electric tricks. But it still feels real, still clings to your coat, still carries the scent of history. A little soot, a little perfume, a little blood. You exhale, slow and deep, and you say goodbye. You've made it. All 30 chapters, every crinoline, coal smudge, corset string and candlelit corner of the Victorian world. You didn't survive it unscathed. But then again, nobody really did. Maybe you started this journey imagining gas lamps and fog, some Charles Dickens on the side, a few well-mannered scandals and a polite tea break with Queen Victoria. And sure, we got those. Plus sewage systems, spiritualism, steam-powered death traps, and a healthy side of existential crisis. Because the Victorian era wasn't just a time period, it was a collision of values, of invention, of control and resistance, silence and revolution. It gave us libraries and labour laws, and also imperialism and arsenic wallpaper. It tried to define civilization, and ended up exposing how messy that word really is. But here's the thing no textbook really captures. The people in it were just like us, struggling to keep up with change, afraid and hopeful, bored and electrified, trying to be good, failing often, occasionally succeeding in dazzling, unforgettable ways. They argued about progress while riding in carriages. They wrote poetry while coughing up soot. They passed laws. They broke hearts. They tried to build futures, and in doing so, they built ours. Now the lamps are dimming. The echo of church bells and factory whistles fades. The last steam engine exhales. You're back in your room. The fan hums softly. The shadows stretch long and kind across the wall. It's late, and you've travelled far, without leaving your bed. So go ahead. Let the past rest now. Close your eyes. You've wandered through empires and ink, and somewhere in the fog, Victoria is still watching.